the role that the board plays in this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ray.
All right. Well, good to see you all again. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you. We're gonna talk about the process that we use at TeamWorks and give you some insight into how that works. Let you ask questions and get insights from what you're seeing, and then assuming that's a path the board wishes to continue, then at the end of our process we'll work on the parameters document that Superintendent just mentioned. So that's the game plan. So we'll talk about the process, we'll talk about timelines, probably most importantly the tools we use and how we do public engagement process at TeamWorks. And then again, if this is the path that we're moving down, then we'll work into engaging with the guiding change document, and we'll fill you in on some of the lingo as we go. So context, we know that the district has 3 differing linked areas of attendance area needs. You got a new elementary school opening, fall of '24, and you have some other elementary additions, and then a need to realign boundaries. So your boundaries are not contiguous; they're all different configurations, and so the idea of looking at trying to bring some configuration to those boundaries. Addressing both capacity and socioeconomic diversity issues in all elementary schools. Middle school attendance areas, again, looking at capacity, paying attention there, also with an eye on the future for growth and how that might look. The process that's before you is that we would be doing some preliminary work. I can't believe we're saying fall, but fall. When I wrote early winter, that really hurt. But that we would do some work this fall and early winter. And right now, a tentative board action on any adjustments would be spring of '24. We could say late winter or early spring. It just depends on how long the process takes.
It sounds better.
Sounds better. There's 3 key components. Our tools, if you will, that we use. We have our decision-making framework. I'm going to go through that in detail. So one of the things I like about that framework is that I found that when people know the roles and responsibilities, what we expect of them in different roles, they just know how to participate. And sometimes people say they want to be part of decision-making, but really all they want is their voice heard and considered. The guiding change document is a tool that we use that actually sets the stage for how does the board and how does an organization move forward with parameters around the change. So the board sets that guiding change document, and you effectively own that. That's an act of governance. So before.
Just 1 second there, just for attendance purposes, Brian Thompson just walked in.
Hey.
Sorry, Brian.
All right.
Didn't mean to call you out, but I
No.
still have to state that.
It's fine.
And then making sure that we're looking at the entire organization, we use a tool called the Whole System View Framework, which talks about the things of organizations, the systems of organizations, and the culture of organizations. Make sure we're getting a full breadth of it. Success factors. The Lakeville area schools is already a TeamWorks school analytics client. So the data that's going to be driving this has already been developed. We just did a refresh report of all the demographic information. Bill and his team has provided capacities. We will get the October 1 enrollment count just after October 1. But that system is already in place for the school district and has been for a couple of years. And we'll use that tool for projections. We'll talk more about those. Guiding change document, we'll talk about that more. The engagement process involves a couple of different teams. So we, again, this is TeamWorks language, but we set out and create a design team. And the design team is a team that actually has knowledge and experience around developing options. So their job is to take that knowledge and experience with the data and then develop options for consideration and input.
Who would typically be on the design team?
District administrators, building principals, other folks at transportation, people with knowledge on transportation, So it's basically administrative. And then we support the team with data and the data analytics guys.
Okay.
The input team is one of the tools we use to get feedback and input on the options. So the design team creates some options and they give those options to an input team. And this is a larger team. We may consider actually having 2 input teams depending on how this flows. But for sure we'll have a group that's made up of staff, any other building administrators that may not be on the design team, parents representing different areas of the school district. And so they'll be on the input team and they'll be giving feedback on the options.
Carrie, did you have a question?
In the past, we had a long list of guidelines that we followed when we were doing boundaries. For example, you don't divide a neighborhood, you use natural, there was a whole list of things. So that when we applied all that, it was pretty well cut and dry where the boundaries are going to go. And we also use, I don't know if you use it, the county has a system where we could take a neighborhood here and we could put a circle around it and tell us how many elementary kids are in that neighborhood.
Yep.
And what grade levels they are. Is that the system you
That
use?
system is already in place here.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
that's a data source that we'll be using to inform when we do the design options.
Yeah.
We'll be able to draw a polygon or a circle around an area. We'll know exactly who those kids are. We know what the demographic profile is of those kids. And so if we were to consider moving that neighborhood to a different school attendance area, we would know what the impact would be demographically, diversity.
Exactly.
Yep,
And so
socioeconomically.
once you do that, it's kind of cut and dry where the boundaries are going to go, really, in a lot of ways.
Yep, and I think all those factors, we're gonna want to make sure we document.
Yes.
So if there's parameters that the board sees that are important. One of the things that the cabinet talked about was no bus routes over an hour.
Yeah,
So we're not going to move,
right.
from one end of the district to the other. So those are the key things that we're going to want to talk about tonight, or some of the ideas that you have.
If, hopefully that information that we used in the last boundaries is here in the district somewhere, because it was very complete guidelines at that time.
We can,
I'm sure it's changed.
yeah, I'm not familiar with it, but we can definitely find and take a look
Yeah,
at that.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yep. Other factors, we also create an environment for parents, staff, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I apologize for being late. What are we doing in this? Are we just providing me a high-level overview of the key steps that we would do in regards to, if the levy gets passed? That's the intent of this meeting?
The intent of the attendance area?
Or the intent, yeah, of this particular agenda topic? Because I don't know if we want to get into the details nor allocate a significant amount of time until we know things are going to move forward. But it would be good for me to at a super high level, like what are the key steps that we're doing to get there? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I don't know what the time limit for this is, or,
It's on your,
oh, I'm in the wrong spot, so that's my mistake. Got it. I'll grab that. Maybe I should move.
Okay, so we also want to create an opportunity for parents and staff and other public to participate and give engagement in the process. So the input team meetings are open. And so people can come and they can watch the input team do their work. And we create a packet of information for those in attendance, and then a way for them to provide feedback. So even though the input team engages in the conversation around the options, there are people that can come and watch and ask questions and submit their feedback electronically. It's really important to have good, timely district communication so that, again, we have a way to communicate this both down and in the organization and up and out to the public. We found that the more communication that happens, the better. What's happening, when and where. So, I'm going to go through a couple of the tools and talk a little bit about them, and then we'll pause and let you give feedback. I don't think we've talked about the guiding change document in the past, but this is the tool that, in this process, the board actually is the owner of the guiding change document. There's 3 key components around guiding change. On the far left is the context and reality. So why are we here? What do we know? What's causing us to even talk about a potential change? It's all the current reality. On the far right side, you'll see the oval that says the desired results. Those are the outcomes that you want to have happen as part of the process. So we try to be really clear about what are the desired outcomes. In the black bands that go around the guiding change document, we call them the unacceptable means. So are there things that as a board you would know are already off the table? So for example, creating an option that would include bus routes greater than an hour would be something you'd say, no, that's not something we want to consider. Right? Then what this does is it creates the environment for the creative and innovation to occur in the middle. So if you read across, the board says, and the district says, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, here are things that are unacceptable. Now within that structure, create options and bring us options that comply with that. The second tool that we use is the decision-making framework, and this is the one that I was speaking about where it defines the roles and responsibilities of the participants. So we start in the center in the decision-making framework. We always need to know who is the choice maker. Now for an attendance area change, that will be the school board. So you will be the choice maker. That is an act of governance that the board would have to do. And in our process, the choice makers are not part of the design or the input. We've found that choice makers are, when your presence is there, it influences the process. People misinterpret comments, body posture, questions, anything like that. And so we really want to create an environment where we can be as creative and as innovative as possible to meet the parameters set by the board, and then give unfiltered feedback. So people would need to feel that they can openly share, this is not good, this is great, have you thought about this? And so the choice maker really sets the parameters, and then the design team creates options, which is the upper right that says creating options. The shared reality is the input team that gives feedback on those options. And the arrow circle in the top center is the iteration. So the design team creates some options that comply with the guiding change. The input team gives feedback and sends it back to the design team. There's a couple of rules for the design team. Once you get a feedback cycle, your options have to change. You don't have to accept all the feedback, but something's got to change. You've got to make another iteration. And we'll get a lot of feedback, especially the first iteration. There'll be things that people didn't think of, impacts that people didn't think of. And so they tweak the options based on the feedback and send it back around again to the input team for another round of feedback. Typically in this process, you'll have to do at least 2 iterations. Depending on how big the changes are, the dynamics, the impacts, no more than 3. Usually by the 3rd iteration of going through that feedback loop, things have kind of settled down. There's not a lot more you can do. And when you fold in your outside engagement from those that come to the input team meetings for observation, as well as online to give feedback on the meeting packets. The idea is to come to you as a school board with a couple of viable options. So that you have your guiding change document, there's a couple of options that actually comply with that for your consideration. Now here's the one guideline that most school board members struggle with. Your choice at the time of choice making for this process, in our process, is to accept or reject the options. It's not to go and tweak. If you tweak an option at the board table, it undoes all of that engagement process, design process. And it's not a black and white relationship. So, for example, in the design team, if they're designing an option, and by the way, Doug sits on the design team, and Doug is feeling that this is something that we didn't really think about or didn't discuss, we would bring that back to the board to make sure that that wasn't a path that you weren't comfortable going down. So even though you approved a guiding change, you can always approve another guiding change. The idea is to get options that don't catch you by surprise, that have been well vetted, and they comply with your guiding change document. So it's not you've got to sit in the dark for weeks and then hope the options come forward that comply with what you're thinking. After you make your choice, either you pick one of the options or you reject them both. We want to set it up so you would have one to pick from. Then we move down to the bottom tier, which is the implementation. And at that point, after the board has made the choice, the staff's job is to implement well. Now, as much work as we're going to do on the back side of this to try to get everything thought of and improved, there may be some refinements that need to be made, but nothing of major consequence. Some people see the refinement oval and think that's a way for them to tweak back to an option they might have liked up above, but it's not. It's an implementation refinement cycle.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So when you say the board's role for choice making is either to just reject or accept, and then that's it, how do they know why we're rejecting? I mean, we're not allowed to say why we're
Oh, yeah.
rejecting?
Yep.
Okay,
Absolutely.
because I guess I was misunderstanding that, going, we might come up with a pretty hefty list, and they might not be able to come up with, meet all of the standards or whatever
Yep.
parameters that we have. So maybe there's a parameter that the board has, like, a more priority for that, and one of your options doesn't have that. So then we would want to be able to share that with,
Yep.
Why.
And the idea is that it's the communication channel from the superintendent to the board is open so that,
Okay.
as things are moving along, you're aware of that, especially if there's something that's out of the ordinary. Because the idea is we want to give you a couple that are viable to meet your expectations.
Correct, okay. Thank you.
But yes, if it just doesn't happen, then they want to know, and we go back to the design team and we continue the process.
Okay.
We don't like to just give.
Nope.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if we can jump to, is there a timeline slide? I mean, or have you already went over that?
I talked about that earlier.
Okay.
So fall, early winter, doing some of the design work, probably midwinter or December, January-ish for input teams, board decision, spring.
So it's customary to do some prep work in preparation to the levy being passed. So we're doing, how much prep work are we doing ahead of time?
The design team would start looking at some options.
Okay.
And it takes a while to, actually our team will take the guiding change that's approved by the board.
Yep.
And they will, from a total outside standpoint, say, okay, if we were on the design team, here's a couple of options that comply with what the board said.
Yep.
And then the design team takes those and we start modeling and tweaking those options.
So what's a typical drop dead date? Like, this has to be done, and then so that you can begin the implementation phase?
Spring 24 would be, you'd have to make a decision
Are
to
we
have
thinking
something
May? Are we
implemented.
thinking March? Are we thinking June?
February, March.
Okay, so February.
Yep. Could be a little earlier. I mean, some of it's hard to predict because we don't know how it's going to play out with how many different options we're considering.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're going to do some prep work, get some community stakeholders involved, October, November, as you go through, and then we have to put some guidance around what that design model might look like or so forth. Got it. Okay. And how many times?
Oh, I was just gonna say, he also talked about, it's not just about Highview opening or not.
Totally. It's
There's other
growth,
things
projections.
that we have to address.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. How many times have you done this for Lakeville?
I don't think we've done
No,
for Lakeville.
not boundaries, no.
Not boundaries. Okay. So how many times has Teamworks done this in general?
Numerous. I don't know. I was part of one just to the north, complete redesign similar to this with all elementary boundaries, middle school boundaries.
Okay. So you've done a couple, but
Yeah,
we
Teamworks.
haven't leveraged Teamworks
Teamworks hasn't been in Lakeville,
For
but we've
Lakeville
done a
before.
lot of metro school districts.
Okay.
Outstate, more urban districts, we've done some work there.
What's the cost for this?
It's hard to guess, I mean, it's hard to estimate because we don't know how many steps we have, but it'd probably not to exceed 39,000.
39,000.
Yep. I try to estimate on the high side if we had to use all the meetings and all the time, how many iterations it's gonna take. But it's all time and materials of putting the process together.
Terry,
And if
is your
it
question?
comes in less, it comes in less.
I thought you were-
Going back to what you were saying, timeline-wise, staffing starts in end of March. So this really needs to be done. And I think a lot of budgeting things have to be done then too, so we have to do that early spring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be done.
Like end of February at the latest.
That's why you're starting this process now.
I get it, but so somebody said maybe April, I was thinking, no, we can't go to April. That's just not gonna make it.
Maybe late winter, even though it sounds bad.
Yeah, I like late
Early
winter.
spring.
Probably, be more positive, early spring.
And I
Early spring.
I think some of, Brian, if I'm reading you right, just some of your uneasiness or questions are coming around the fact that we're starting that discussion before the levy has been, is that?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
yes.
But
And so I
I think that's
understand the
fair.
value of starting it early so that we can get some pre-work and
Right.
guidance out, you know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's more rushed, and the other component
Right.
is you also have to have some parameters on if it doesn't pass, because your boundaries are probably
We're
going to be
still going to be
adjusted
doing it, yeah.
in some way, shape, or form regardless of what happens.
So if the levy doesn't pass, we're doing boundaries no matter what?
Right.
Is that my
Because we're
understanding?
overcrowded, yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause we're
we've got,
overcrowded.
got classes in libraries and different situations, so we'll have to do some type of restructure, and that's the challenge. If it doesn't
Yeah.
pass, you're probably making some adjustments now, and then hopefully when it does pass, you're probably making adjustments
Yeah.
again.
you're gonna
So you end up,
replace-
we end up having to
Whether
make
we're
two
making
paths,
permanent
probably.
or
I'm sorry.
temporary adjustments.
We'd probably have to end up having two paths, one without it passing and one with passing. I mean,
A little
it's-
bit, and that's, I've already had that conversation with Ray, is that the
Yeah.
goal is hopefully that you plan for it to pass, but you also have to be, so if it doesn't pass, you have to use some of those same parameters to make adjustments on what option B would.
Yep. How did we do this before? I mean, no offense to Teamworks, like, how did we do boundaries before?
This was the process that we had used, but similar, not exact, but similar. But we did it internally, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of time, and it also, it also becomes, I don't know, Terry, I mean, when some board members and others were involved in it, and it becomes very personal and
Contentious almost.
it is, and so this is outside eyes looking at it, and I really welcome this, especially for a district this size, because it's really hard to do it internally, and the time commitment is unbelievable, and I don't know that we have the resources with everything else we've got on the plate to be able to try to do a dragged out process like this, and it becomes very emotional, and we do it every once in a while, they do it all the time, so there's things that they know what to look for and what to watch for, and I'm pretty confident that the investment that we made in the people doing it, Terry, you tell me if I'm off base, probably was a lot more than $39,000 from start to finish.
I've been on, I think, every boundary change
Me too.
since we started.
Yep.
It's gotten a lot better. I mean, the pressure was on in the 80s and 90s, the pressure was really on from the,
Yep.
and the board, I wasn't on the board, the board bent. The people that didn't show up were the ones that moved. That was basically it. It was unfortunate, but that's the way it was. Then we developed a system that was much more objective. There was still pressure from the community, but it was much more objective, and you had these guidelines. I kept talking about that.
Parameters.
That the parameters that really, really took care of a lot of the issues that were coming from the community and became much more positive. And then in using that, the county system, where we would sit down and we would say, what happens if we move this neighborhood? Circle it, and okay, those
Yeah.
kids are in middle school, 14 are in the high school, and you could just,
But again, that takes a lot of time.
Takes
and
time.
A lot of resources, and so this process is a really great process, and it allows us to be kept, board members to be kept up to date with what's going on, without being heavily engaged. And that's a good thing. Our engagement is establishing the parameters and the guidelines and the do's and the don'ts types of things. And then to have somebody else go back and try to build a program doing all of that work is phenomenal, and I think it would be beneficial.
So underneath our system is a GIS system, which is the same as the county. And so the tool that we use for the design team actually allows us to engage in live data.
Yep.
So we can get a profile in the moment of who's sitting there today. And then if we have an option that we'd like, we send it back to the analytics team, and they complete a 5 and 10 year projection based on the enrollment, the capacity, the demographic profile. So you'll have a picture of what that looks like for 10 years based on that one move. So we're not only making suggestions on who's here today, but where are you going to be in 10 years?
And that's one thing we didn't do, because we didn't have the ability or the capability or the time frame to do it.
Yeah.
Do you also take into consideration what new housing developments are going to be possibly in down the line? So when we do boundaries, we don't have to do them 2 years later again because this neighborhood grew up real quick? Expanded?
So Lakeville is part of, it's called Metro Study, which is a group that monitors all developments across the 9 counties in the metro. And they have a master database that we subscribe to, so we get quarterly updates on those developments. Once in a while, something will pop up faster and we just adjust the tool.
Is Elko New Market part of that too?
They are right on the border. I don't know where the line is. I think the northeast corner of that area, Elko New Market is.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are monitoring, but there was, and Bill might remember, there was a newer apartment complex that went in that was not on anyone's radar, so we had to fold that into the mix to capture that information. So right now, we're thinking 3 to 5 design team meetings over a couple of months to generate options. We do an orientation meeting with the design team, kind of set the stage. We go through the guiding change documents so they know the parameters they're working with. And then the other teams are for iterations. So they'll take options, they'll review them, make tweaks. 2 to 4 input team meetings are in the model. And that's the team that gives feedback on the options. We always want to take a couple of options to an input team. Because if you take one option, all you hear is what they don't like or what's good. So we take a couple and we ask for what are the strengths of each one, what are the questions of each one, and what suggestions for improvements do you have on each one. So the design team takes all of that data back. Same thing for the public and those off the website. And depending on how the process goes, there's anywhere from 2 to 4 choice maker meetings. So as we start to move forward, there'll be an opportunity to come to a work session to share information updates for the board so that you're prepared for a decision. Did we land on spring? Are we spring or late winter? Spring?
Spring sounds better.
So that's kind of an overview of the process. This was the whole system view framework I mentioned. We set this as a context, so we're looking at all things around the organization. So I'm going to pause to see what questions you have, comments, insights, thoughts on the process.
Go ahead.
No, obviously I haven't gone through a border change before, so this is fascinating just to listen and hear. I think conceptually it makes sense to me. I mean, obviously with my business background, we've done hundreds of organization chart changes. And so when I think of the key steps of stakeholder feedback, decision-making, and implementation, part of that is to ensure that we've got appropriate feedback from all the appropriate stakeholders. And so from teachers to students to parents, well, maybe, I don't know, students to parents, staff, administration, and so forth. So that makes sense. I think conceptually that's probably in line with how organizational changes occur. Biggest factor for me is making sure that we've got a very robust change management plan, communication plan, so that folks know this is coming or how it impacts their kids, and it gets a bit more tactical. So since I wasn't here in past border changes, if this seems easier, I'll take your word on that, but I'll defer to Doug and his administration team. I don't know if you've, because we haven't gone through a vendor before, so this is our first time. If you guys are comfortable with TeamWorks as your vendor of choice, navigating us through this process, a $39,000 investment in navigating to that end result seems super reasonable to me. So that's my point of view.
So I'm just going to add a comment. I'm not sure that it's any easier. I think it is more thorough. I think it's more thorough, and I agree, Brian, it does bring in all the different stakeholders, and eventually when we get down to the final couple of options, or you go out to the input team, there's certain things about neighborhoods that you don't always know by looking at a circle on a map or something, and so, that irons out all of those little kinks and stuff like that. But when all is said and done, this process seems to be very well-rounded to be able to do what we need to do. And if you guys thought budgets were emotional, this gets very emotional.
Nobody wants to leave their buildings.
No, this is
Nobody.
really emotional. So when you can have a really professional, defined process like this that everybody can be involved in, and I saw the information up there about being on the website, and Steph and her team will do a fantastic job getting that out, because believe me, this is one thing that nobody will say, I didn't know this was happening, because they will be watching it from day one.
Special ed parents and kids have to do it all the time now. You want to make your comment on it?
I agree with that. Yeah.
What?
Happens a lot.
Yeah,
What?
having to
Special
move,
ed kids,
transition.
What about them?
they move outside of their neighborhood school
Yeah.
for services.
Both of my kids
Well-
went to totally different elementary, middle, and high schools.
But a lot of
Just
it
for
has
the-
to do with the number of kids that are in those categories. You
I'm
can't
just
have one
saying-
kid
I'm
in.
just saying it, I'm just.
Correct,
saying it for the-
but-
Yeah.
But this type of process helps take all of that into consideration. And, it'll be two different processes. If it's a long-term solution because we're opening the elementary, or if it's a short-term solution because we're not, then we'll probably be back at the table. So, to me, I think it's a good solution.
Whichever one of you wants to go first.
No, I think the only request that I have is a significant amount of transparency as you go through the process. I'd like to know how many stakeholders were engaged. I'd like to know, are they parents, from what schools, how many teachers are involved, what the administration is. I think from my point of view is that when I've done organizational changes, not having the appropriate representation to
Right.
provide commentary and feedback throws everything into a loop.
All
So-
voices at the table.
And I understand not everyone's going to get alignment, but if we are directionally correct with where we need to go or how we want to go, I think that's good. So that would be the only ask that I have.
Carly?
I was going to say, I appreciate having an objective party as part of this process, because it just, to your point about, we're going to get lots of feedback, and at least you can kind of go back to, I do have questions about how we create this guiding change kind of document, but if it all comes back to, this is what the data is telling us in terms of how we need, and it becomes more data-driven decision-making that has an objective party influence, so.
What I found in my last experience was that the fact that the analytics guys know nothing about Lakeville, they have no history, they have no connections. So they purely are an independent party on starting from scratch based on what you say. Gives a pretty nice place to start. It doesn't mean it's perfect because we have to bring in those nuanced changes, but it is a totally third-party look to start the process.
How do we go about, with this guiding change?
She's getting ready to walk you through that.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yep. So still move forward with the group. I'll hand these out. So what we did is a few weeks ago, met with, was it the full cabinet? Full cabinet. The full cabinet, and started a draft for your consideration. So we had the group go through and talk about what they saw as current reality, some of the desired outcomes from their perspective, and again, some of the not hows or unacceptable means. And so what we want to do in our remaining time, about 20 2 or 3 minutes is have you have a chance to kind of look through. We'll do each section at a time, and we'll add any thoughts that board members have.
Can we postpone that to like next week's meeting? Like, I'm gonna need more time to think through this.
So this is just step one.
'Cause I'm not
You'll
prepared.
have continuing
'Cause I
time
didn't
to
get
look
it ahead
through
of
this,
time.
but next meeting is an actual, like a full board meeting, so it wouldn't be like discussion, it would be voting on things.
So
So,
you're
I
just gonna
mean,
read this out loud, and we're gonna just, that's it.
it's just step one.
Okay, so between now and the board meeting, if there's things that you do think of, then we'd want you to get them to the superintendent.
Yeah.
And so that when we come to the board meeting, eventually we want the board to approve this guiding change document. Because that's what sets the ball rolling.
And
So-
when do you want that approved?
Spring,
Pardon?
right? Is it spring?
No,
What's
this
the guiding
is,
changes?
Oh, the guiding
this is
changes.
the
That's why I asked.
document that you use to set the parameters
Yeah.
Okay.
of what things you feel are important. So
This will
that-
have to be done in a few months.
Well, it needs to be done
Maybe done
sooner rather
sooner.
than later
So they can
because.
start the
So they can start the
analysis.
process and
Yeah.
the analysis of the data based upon what you said.
So what you're basically saying is, we're gonna go over this, give input, and if there's input between now and the board meeting, get that input in, and at the board meeting, we aren't adding any more input, right? No surprises?
It's not going to be next board meeting.
It could be
Yeah,
next
they're
board
talking
meeting,
about
depending
next
on
board
when you
meeting.
walk
Well, that's
through
what
this.
we're
It
asking
could be
about.
next board
I'm
meeting,
not sure
depending
I'm
on what
comfortable
this,
with that.
and if
Okay,
it's
hang
not,
on, hang on.
you just have to walk through and see what those things are.
Yeah.
Because there are only so many things that are negotiable and some things that are not negotiable
Yeah.
in this process. So let them walk through it, let them see where you're at.
Yeah, can you
and if
send us
it's not
these
ready,
documents
you're
when you're
able to do
done? Like, I don't, this is the only thing that I've gotten so far about this. So I thought we were just doing a high-level overview, not you get into the weeds. And I also would like to see if a timeline, if I can, to say like, when are we starting this? And if the drop dead date is, let's say, end of February, let's go backwards from there of when do you need to get things started? And then the core objectives that we're trying to achieve. So that would be helpful for me.
Yep, and it's all in the slide deck, so
Okay.
you can have that. This wasn't, typically we don't put this out until the board is on board with the process. Because if this isn't a process you want to use, then there's no reason to spend time on
Yeah.
this. The other thing I want to mention is the decision you make, so if the board takes action next week on the guiding change, you have the ability to revise it. As a matter of fact, once we get into the work, there may be something that comes up that you want to consider revising your guiding change document. So it's not like you decide on this in September and you can't change it.
And, you know, I guess you look at the why, and, you mean, these things right now probably have been developed off of conversations with the administration. So, you know, the why of what we're doing, there's probably nothing here that you would disagree with, but maybe there's something more. But when you start looking at the unacceptables, there will be things that as we go through that might surface to the top. And it's a fluid process. This process, the process we used to have, there will be things that you think of outside the box. But I would look at this, is this a good place to start? Is there anything that's glaringly missing? And then let them start their process and we can tweak and move as we go.
Okay.
But I will tell you, if you want that true transparency for the parents, you better start the process now.
So let's start talking through some of the things. So Dave, you mentioned that you were concerned about students on IEPs that are not attending their neighborhood schools. That's under our current Y. And when I look at that, item B on the what says students attending home schools as much as possible, create an environment so they can. So is that including students on IEPs? Are we going to try to realign our programs to where the elementary programs are then feeding into the middle schools that those students would attend? Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
That was with the input of Carol and me at Cabinet to be
Okay.
able to ensure that we have more students able to follow a natural path if possible.
Awesome. I love
Doesn't-
that. Thank
Doesn't mean that we can guarantee that for every student, but we're trying to
Right.
make sure that we can do that more than what we are right now.
And you
So that's
take a-
good.
Yeah, if you take a look at number 3
just
on
think-
unacceptable, that's what that means as well.
Okay. And I think that's something that we've talked about a lot as a district over the years, so it's good to see that that's on there, I think. I appreciate that, thanks.
So kind of let Ray run through these with you as you're reading through them and
Yeah.
Okay.
go from there.
Yeah, let's start with the current reality. I don't need to read them out loud unless you want me to.
We'll do the Amazon way.
I don't need written.
What's that?
Oh, we do the Amazon way. They don't do PowerPoint slides, they hand out 6-page memos, and everybody spends 30 minutes, they read the memo, and then 30 minutes to deliberate.
So I
But
guess
people
like,
can't home.
people at home wouldn't know, so if you could read.
Yeah.
it
Are these
probably-
listed publicly?
No, they just handed to you tonight.
We haven't approved it.
Because you haven't approved anything to be publicly
Right.
handed out.
It's a word.
I think it'd be quicker if Ray just reads it.
Yep,
Okay, so the current reality, the why, there's an elementary school opening in the fall of '24. One unacceptably large elementary and 2 on the bubble from a capacity standpoint. One middle school is large and on the bubble from capacity. Growth is going to continue in the district. We already know the developments that are existing and their growth patterns. The current boundaries are not contiguous, meaning a bus has to run through, in one case, 3 different attendance areas, picking a kid up to go to at their school, which creates transportation inefficiencies. You serve a large area, and there are impacts on busing. There's 86 square miles. You don't have any buildings or many buildings in the south, any buildings in the south. The growth is lopsided east and south. There is some west, but most of it's east and south. You're not operating a true feeder system, so elementary to middle school to high school.
Kinda.
No, we're
no,
not.
because there's
It's not
schools that are
true.
split.
Well, yeah, one, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Eastview kids go to north
Century.
or Century, and then Century goes to north, so it's straight, yep.
There's some, it's not consistent.
It's not, and what he means by true,
Two-thirds.
it's not there,
It's
it's
not
not a true would be everybody would have an exact pattern. Some go to certain places and then
Yeah.
split out. So it's not 100% true. It's close, but there's some
Right.
split.
Kenwood split, that's the only one I can think of.
There's some demographic imbalance across current boundaries, so different demographic profiles in some schools. There's no bus routes currently over an hour. With 2 high schools, there are clear identities between the 2 to be mindful of. School choice has an impact both now and in the future. Not only open enrollment, but also internal choice. Parents, staff, and students are not necessarily wanting to change schools. Students on IEPs are not attending their neighborhood schools and have been moved multiple times based on space needs and availability. Center-based programs exist in certain schools. The Ignite program located in one school and enrollment through application and choice. And currently no preschool classes in elementary schools. So this was the list of current reality that the cabinet team came up with. Anything that board members see glaringly omitted?
Nope, I don't think so.
Hearing none, I'll jump over to the what, or the desired outcomes.
I reserve the right, though, to think about it.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
The desired outcomes from this process, options should serve both current and future needs of the district. Students attending homeschools as much as possible, and I'm missing a word, to create an environment so that they can do so, I think is what it's supposed to say. Balanced enrollment
Can you explain what B means? I don't think I understand that.
Like
so
their
students
school in
can-
their home area.
Oh, so,
I thought that meant homeschool at first, but
Homeschooling,
he means
yeah.
like the school that's in your neighborhood.
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Balanced enrollment to capacity across all schools. Appropriately sized learning environments, which is also related to capacity. Bus routes should be balanced to the degree possible given the size of the district. Contiguous boundaries so bus routes don't cross boundaries. Consistent supports in schools to mitigate choices made by parents to move students. Equitable access to opportunities across all schools. Minimize disruption of boundary changes with clear communication about why changes are needed. Benefits of aligning boundaries to students. J, mindful of safety zones around schools and the impact of transportation. Process has authentic stakeholder engagement, building trust and lifting up voices. Balanced demographics across buildings. The implementation of boundary options needs to consider transitions. So that means if someone's enrolling a kindergarten student next fall and then the year after there's a boundary shift, having that available so they know that in advance. So they're not having to move within a year of starting a school. And the options will consider data, demographics, and capacity, and not emotional.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do staff within the school, or like, is it the vision of our admin team to have preschool classes in the elementary schools? Because that was under the why, like that we don't have that. So I'm just wondering, is that an option, like, they want that in elementary school?
Want what?
A preschool class.
I would say that since there's not capacity within your schools now, that
Right.
can't be an option. I
Okay.
think that's something we would consider
Okay,
as you move forward to be able to have that, because if you have a preschool within your school that then feeds into kindergarten, you've already started that transition
Right.
within that school, but
Okay.
without that, so that's just a current reality. So
Okay.
we'd have to see how that plays out, because some of it's a cost as well.
Well, I
You know,
did.
The more you spread the
Crystal Lake's
program
pretty
out,
full, so.
the more it's cost.
One point you brought up the kindergarten, changing buildings after a year. I think in the past too, that we've looked at, let's say, under our current configuration of grade levels, that a fifth grader might be able to stay that year, instead of moving to another elementary school for 1 year before they go to the middle school. Same with the middle schools, the kids that was in eighth grade, were going into grade could stay that last year before they transfer over.
Yep.
Is
So
that,
one of
is
the-
that part of it?
Yeah, one of the last things we'll ask at the last input team is what recommendations they have for implementation. And so there can be, a true black-white, like you're in this building this year, you've got to move, doesn't matter where you're at, or is there the ability to finish out your time at that school if you're 1 year away or 2 years away? Those all have cost implications too. We got to make sure that Bill has a chance to cost those so we know what that is. So you'll have all that information before you decide. And the last project we did a 2-year implementation. So we opened the new school, created a boundary, but we advertised what the boundaries were going to be for the second year so everybody knew. And then if they wanted to enroll their kindergarten student at their new school that they would be transferred to, they could do that.
When we did that, I think they were responsible for transportation. The
Yep.
parent would be, and
Yep.
most parents here are fine with that because it was the last year with their friends, da-da-da. Okay,
Yeah, and we would have to
Yeah.
work with Bill to put numbers to all that.
okay.
Is there anything else in the desired outcomes that, sitting here tonight,
Yeah,
didn't think of?
I don't think I'm aligned with B and C, or B and G. Maybe I need to understand how you're defining that, because, school zoning or school boundary mapping isn't going to create an environment so that parents send their kids to their home school. I mean, maybe if it's closer, maybe if their house is one area and then the school that's closest to them, they're not aligned to that. They're not zoned to that because they're on the edge of a particular border. So I think that makes sense. So I want to make sure that B and I think G articulate it's making it easy for parents to send their kids to the home school because it's close by, not because they're like on the edge of the border. If the elementary school is behind my back street and I can't send my kids there, like that is an example.
that happens.
If that makes sense, right? So that's how I'm interpreting what
Some
B
cheerleading
is,
or like that.
versus we're not creating an environment where if someone wants to send their kids to a different elementary school, because that's where they want them to go. I mean, I look at like G. I think what I like to do is see the wording of B and G to be more about mapping and boundary. Does that make sense, or am I?
I don't
Not understanding
understand.
this.
So this is saying students attending home schools as much as possible. That means if we create this
The mapping.
boundary.
Yep. So when I read creating an environment, I'm interpreting that as we're changing the schools. We're doing something with the schools inside, creating the environment.
Well,
So-
that kind of goes to what we were talking about with special ed, because our special ed programs are not aligned they're only in specific buildings. So
Yep.
a lot of times kids have to change schools
Yep.
just to access special education
Well, that's a
services. So
resource
that-
issue, that's not a,
So I
But
that's
then
not
we
a
would have to
zoning issue.
realign some of the things within the buildings to allow that
But
to
I
happen.
think what this is saying, and I might be mistaken, but if you develop the boundaries for this homeschooled environment, and they want the families and the students to be attending their homeschools so they can develop a sense of community and environment around that school, right? I don't think it's inside the school.
It's not an inside environment, because really, the way I interpret it and the way I think our team put it together was, the environment now is you have jigsaw puzzle pieces. of-
Yes.
You go from this
Right.
school, this area over here goes to this school, but you pass two others. So the environment is not set up in a way because of the boundaries. So that would be the adjustment that I see on.
Yep.
We could strike that last part of that sentence
Yeah.
and change the language to say students attending neighborhood
Neighborhood,
schools as
yeah.
much
Yeah.
as possible.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
That'd be more
I
sense.
think that's good, and
It makes more sense.
And that would be the same as G then, right? I mean,
similar, consistent.
Because that,
Well,
again, that's a
because
resource
There
issue.
are some supports in our elementary schools that are different, like the different programming that we have
Yeah.
is like the gifted programming is only in one school.
True.
The Programming for,
DCD.
at Orchard Lake.
DCD
Some of our
is a
special
good
ed
title.
programming is in only
So
certain
maybe the
schools.
wording there isn't consistent supports, is it consistent program supports, or?
Well, now we're mixing programs and zoning, so I just want to be mindful, I would have assumed that one elementary school is the same as all the rest of the elementary schools, but it's not. And so we can't we're not going to solve that with boundaries. So the intent of this conversation is making sure that we have enough capacity for growth, and it's equal in students in all the elementary schools. Like, that should be the focus, if that's how I'm reading what this ought to be.
I
Make
think
sense?
this conversation, and maybe we need to word it, but the conversation was, there have been decisions made from a capacity standpoint to locate programs in certain places that aren't the
Correct.
same everywhere. So
Correct.
the capacity has driven decision-making around programs in the past, and this is saying, if we're gonna redo boundaries, then we could reconsider those past decisions.
Yeah,
If a program got placed because of a capacity issue, because we only had space here,
yeah.
it may not create what you just said, that all school programs are the same.
Because a parent, the program may be on the far north side of the district.
Yep.
And the parent's on the far south side, and they don't want their kid to go all.
Yeah.
So that's how I interpret what
Okay.
Ray said as well, that you want to have it so the parent has the ability to have the program needs of their
Program.
kids met as close in proximity to their.
Would boundaries fix that? That we actually,
Possibly.
we'll put a
In some-
we'll put a
in
program
some
in that
cases,
building?
though,
In some cases, because of the capacities of our schools get equalized out, so the space availability is
Then we
now
could have,
more
we could offer that
distributed.
program. Got it. Yep. I mean, again, like, an elementary school should be the same as the rest of them. It doesn't make sense to me that we're offering different things in different places, but.
Well, some of those are based on funding
Yeah.
too. So like, for example, like Title I funding is linked to free and reduced lunch population. So if you have a building that has the high free and reduced lunch population, then they have Title I services. So that's
And they have
also,
to.
right, that's also something that needs to be taken into consideration.
It's
Or
like-
your specialists who are just at certain schools that deal with a certain special ed population that you wouldn't have in every.
Because there's more special ed in one area.
And there's just some elementary schools that can only have DCD.
So we were
programs,
talking
Because it's
about-
a smaller amount of kids.
We were talking about this during the stakeholder session, and the fact that systemically, we want consistency and equitable resources and programs across all of our schools, all the elementaries.
Yes.
But certain elementaries are going to have certain pockets of either demographics or needs or Title I that are going to require different resources to meet the needs of those students or to meet the needs of what is required by law. So you're not going to see cookie cutter across, but you're going to see systemic consistency to ultimately provide an equitable educational and opportunity program for our kids. Is that kind of
And that's what you would
something
hope,
that we
but
talked about?
capacity has driven some of
Yeah.
those decisions
Yeah.
now, rather than having flexibility to make those decisions based upon the needs of the students and the families.
Yeah.
Right.
So then, when we go to letter L, balanced demographics across the buildings, are we making demographics a higher priority than, like, here's the capacity? I mean, the capacity is like if you're at 65%, 65%, 65% across the board, or are we making it where this school has the same demographics as this school has the same demographics as this school has the same demographics? Because I think that's like, because is that how you going? Is that how you're attacking the boundary zones?
It's probably going to be a little bit of both, because I think you have to take a look at the capacities of your building, then you have to take a look at the demographics, because as I said, we've got jigsaw puzzle pieces out there.
Yep.
So what happens if you move this jigsaw puzzle piece into this boundary? What does that do to the demographics of the area? Well, if you draw a circle around this school, what does that do to the demographics of it? Because you don't want to have all of your low free and reduced lunch kids going to one school. You don't want to have all of your diversity within one. You want to be able to spread those out as equitably as you can. Otherwise, you create the illusion of the haves and the have-nots, or that this school has the rich kids or the poor kids, or, those are the types of things that you try to balance out so that you can say, we are consistently implementing the resources across our district the way we need to.
Well, I think I was going to say, I think it's also important to make sure that we have balanced demographics, because otherwise it puts us into
Racially
isolated schools. We can be racial
We already have-
isolated
we
districts, but
already
now
that.
you can do district,
But one
not
thing-
schools.
One thing,
And you can become racially isolated as a school, and then you've got other state mandates that you have to.
Before your comment, I just want to be mindful that we have 2 minutes left on this
Yep.
discussion.
Got it.
So we need to think about, as a
Talk about next
board,
week.
does this want to be moved to vote? Like, do you want to think on it for a week? Like, how do we want to move forward on this topic? Or this list right now?
I'm not going to say anything, let's just make.
So can we just go through the center?
Yeah, so on the desired outcomes, many of these are to the degree possible. So balanced demographics across buildings to the degree possible, right? Because if we're going to say not transporting more than an hour, we're not going to put kids on the bus for 2 hours to balance schools. So it's to the degree possible. The not how or unacceptable means, there are 6 categories. No option can knowingly violate law, policy, or agreements. The option cannot create an imbalance demographically. Options cannot move special education programs around with frequency. No options can have bus routes longer than an hour. Options cannot ignore future growth and preparations for enrollment fluctuations. And the options cannot have imbalance size of schools.
So at a future meeting, are we going to get, I'm curious about some of the demographic type things that we're talking about, just because you do think about, an hour is a long time for an elementary kid to spend on a bus. And so are we going to get more information about the demographics of schools and what we're exactly looking at for?
Well, to me, I guess it depends, because if you say you don't want your demographics to be imbalanced, then that's what they do, is they put the options together so you can see what those are. Because right now, we do have some imbalances, and
That's what I'm curious.
but knowing them right now is not necessarily gonna, this is just my take on it, isn't gonna change. Either you want that or you don't want that. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Is that if we know there's some imbalance, which we do right now, if we're saying we want it to not be imbalanced, then that's what they work on, is options to provide that, to show you that they're not imbalanced. And they would show you, hey, the demographic of this school is white, black, Hispanic, would have all the demographics flow and free reduced lunch as they put those options together. That's what I think you want to see in the plan of what's taking place, not necessarily what's right now.
So what we need to think about right now is that, are we ready to move forward and approve these parameters at the meeting on Tuesday, correct? Is that what?
Well,
Yes.
you can do
Or do we
two,
need
you
to
can
wait?
do a couple of things. Number one, you can take these and take a look at them, kind of like what Ray was saying, have some time to study them and say, hey, here's some other questions I have. And then we can try to provide that feedback to you between now and then. And if you get the information you want, you can say, hey, we're got these questions answered, we've added these particular things, and you can make that adjustment. Or you can say, hey, we've asked these questions, didn't get the answer, I'm not ready to do it, and we can schedule another time to get it approved. So you're not necessarily locked into either or. I think you have the flexibility to either approve it based off of changes, to say you have more time, I think that we just know that we need to keep the process moving forward rather than saying it's going to be a whole nother month in the process. If you go through it and you say, hey, I've gotten the information that I need, knowing that there's some flexibility to make changes later on based upon the information that's presented, great. If you're not ready, great. Then we'll just know we have to provide more information and get it ready to go a little sooner, and that may compact some of the timeline that he has.
I think the key is we're able to change this if you want to in
Yeah.
the future, so.
So what's the urgency? Like, what are you doing with this tomorrow? Anything? Are you gonna have, when's your kickoff meeting?
So when you approve it, then we send it to our analytics team. So the first step is for them to take a look at this and all the parameters and put together some options from their chair.
How long does that normally take?
It'll take them, well, the data's already up and running, so we want to wait till October 1 to get the student count.
Okay.
They'll start doing work right away.
Okay, so October 1 would be like the very last date, is what I'm hearing.
We have to, yeah, October 1 is a.
Because you got a file that comes in, so you can't really do anything until then.
It's, yeah, we take a download from your student information system on October 1. That's
Yeah.
the magic date of student enrollment.
Okay, and they can put some preliminaries, but then
means-
we get refreshed on October 1st.
So
So you don't really need this tomorrow or next week?
You're looking for
they can
approval.
start doing, because you guys already have the system, they can start doing work as soon as you approve this. It really doesn't make sense for them to do a whole lot of work until they have this approved with some parameters to operate from.
So we either approve it next week or we wait till the end of October because I don't want to have a special
But
session.
he said he didn't want to wait
I
till
know,
the
that's
end
what
of
I'm saying.
October.
Well,
so-
Yeah,
Or
that's
so-
what he's saying. He's laying
That's
it
what-
out
that's
that
what I'm
it's
saying.
Yeah.
approved
Okay.
now so that next week, so that it can be in effect starting now in October 1st, because otherwise we're
Because
waiting
I don't
to
want a
the
special
end of
meeting.
October.
I don't want a special meeting. I don't
Okay.
want to.
I understand.
So-
And I think the fact that you have the flexibility that if you see something, you say, hey, I've got this issue, and then we get it to the people that are putting it together, and then they readjust
So if
what they
somebody,
need to.
Mike, they were asking, can we change this? So are we going to be respectful enough or agree enough that, like, let's say Terry looks this over and then wants to add something after we approve it?
What's
We'd
the
have to
process?
share that with all of you,
Right,
and you
yeah.
all as a group would have to decide if that's what you want.
Okay, so we'd have to vote on it. Okay.
In my opinion, once you approve it,
That's what I was asking.
the only way it gets changed
Yep.
is by you
what
voting
I
on
meant.
to change it again.
Okay.
But that would be 30 days from now, we could be doing it at the
I
October
was just-
meeting.
I just wanted to
No, I get
clarify.
it,
Yeah,
but that's.
it's not gonna be you call me and say, hey Doug, I want this, and I call Ray and say, hey, you need to add this.
Right.
You'd share that with me, I'd send that out to the rest of the board and say, hey, here's what was asked of me, what other information do you need for that? That would be something you would need to make an improvement, approve and edit in this document.
So we could approve of this coming meeting, and then we've got 30 days if there's anything that we want to, if we feel there's anything we want to add. And those additions can all be then approved in October, but in the meantime, you've got 30 days to start working on things based off this.
And you've got a week to take a look at it and say, hey,
Yep.
here's another idea, and then we
Yep.
present that to you at the next board meeting if that's something you as a board want to
Yep.
add.
The last piece, so if this is too tight, then it's harder to get options, and the analytics team will let you know that. And if it's too loose and you have 40 options, we may come back and say, you need to have some more desired outcomes, because there's too many different options out there. So
Okay.
it's meant to be flexible.
So is the board comfortable with having this put on the agenda for Tuesday? Knowing that we have this time to work on it and that we can also make some changes based on,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so,
I'm good.
so you're gonna pass that deck and you're gonna, do you have a timeline, like a project plan that says, here are the key things that we're doing in week 1, week 2, week 3? Okay,
not yet.
okay.
Not yet.
All right, but knowing that if we're gonna use February 28th as the end date, then work backwards from there. And then depending upon the number of sessions you normally have done in the past, but obviously given our size with 11,800 students, you know, stuff of that nature, so.
Okay,
All right,
all right.
cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
So we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic on the agenda, which is the data dashboards.
So we've got some folks that are gonna come and pull that up with you. Hopefully you got the information. I know Kim sent it out, had trouble opening it, she resent it again. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to take a look at it. I will say that some of the data, if, as you looked at it, you saw October 1st, of course, that's last year's data. That just shows you that'll be updated. I'm sure Cheryl will share that with you, but if you haven't met Cheryl, You have Cheryl here who's going to share that. She spent a lot of time putting a lot of this together for us, along with Emily and her team. So with that, I think they're going to link up and then start walking through it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'll start while Cheryl's getting her screen set up there. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge Cheryl for her hard work. Her work has really been to take the data that exists in the system and put it into a format that would be more easily accessible and understandable to you as a Board of Education. I know that Doug has shared with you already that our intent is that we would be providing this to you on a monthly basis. Each month, what you'll see is that some of the data has changed because maybe we have completed an assessment or done something, and some of the data will stay the same just because it depends on what point in the year that data is available. Yeah. So anytime we have available data, we will update this for you and provide that to you via the new WAU, so you can see how we're progressing as an organization. I will add that this data is last year's data. So everything you see on here is last year's, and then going forward, what you'll see is as we have updated information, you'll see the more recent data for this year. So it's really meant to be sort of a more in-time snapshot of a wide variety of different types of assessments that we do in the district to determine our levels of success, both with our staff and our students and as a district as a whole. So, so I'll let Cheryl was in charge of gathering, creating, putting everything together for us. So what I'm gonna have her do is walk through each part of this so you understand what you're looking at, and then we'll answer some questions if you have more specific questions.
Got it.
Can we let her get started?
Okay, well, I just want to acknowledge, I appreciate putting this together. This is good. It was helpful for me to have a snapshot, but I do have some additional comments, and I'll wait until the end.
Great, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I think this is the first time I've been in front of you guys this year, so thank you. I wanted to just kind of dive right in, but make sure you're aware of a few things. Every single one of these graphs that you're going to see has a backstory and a lot of information. So it's really important that we don't laser focus into any one particular part on this, because it's really about the whole picture, not about each one of these components. So our data has we've worked really hard, the technology department and teaching and learning, to clean up quite a bit of things in order to produce this. And so it's really taken a lot of people that maybe are not around this table to get to where we are right now. So really proud of this. The way you're gonna see this, the banners across the top are really kind of your headers, and all the data underneath that really flow into that header. So you're gonna see demographics, you're gonna see attendance data, you're gonna see major behavior data, you're gonna see academic data, you're gonna see like student survey, how students are feeling in our schools. And then you're also gonna see our plans, so our achievement and integration plan, as well as our world's best workforce. The district leadership has also seen this on our August days as well, so we really use this to drive a lot of our SKIP planning, so our school improvement planning process, as well as our operating planning as we've been kind of working this past month. So on the first page, it's really talking about the demographics. There is nothing here that's breaking down individual buildings, so you're not going to see any buildings called out on any of this document. So this is across the district where we are at. The colors are the same, so whenever you see white, it's always going to be represented by that blue. And so it really does try to flow as you're going through this document. So you can see as of October 1 last year, because this is a year in review, so it's last year's data, this is where we were at with our demographics. You can see I did break it down between the elementary and secondary as well. So the big graph is district, and then it's broken down. Then we have enrollment by grade. We also have subgroups. So we have special education, 504, EL, and free and reduced. The red is talking about the district, and then it breaks it down into elementary, where those percentages are based on the total population of our kids. This is the only place, I should say, it's the only place you're going to see buildings, and that is just by the enrollment, just looking at some of the inequities between our building sizes. You can very much see those, and you can see that in elementary, it's all like blue, middle school's green, and then it gets darker colors It does say link 12 because that at the time was the name of those buildings. I do realize those are not the names anymore.
Can we talk about comments on each page, or are we just wait until the whole thing?
I'm okay with comments on each page if
I
there's a
think let's
question
wait
about
and try to
that.
get through it, just because of the timing.
Yeah. Well, I mean.
Because I don't want to spend like too
well,
much on one slide and then we don't get to the rest.
Right, but a dashboard is generally not like 6 or 12 pages, but that's, and so a couple things I want to just highlight on the enrollment by grade. I really appreciate that. It would be helpful for me to know what's our capacity and are we actually over? Because this tells me, like, on this particular date, there's 883, but it doesn't tell me are we over or are we under in capacity in that particular location. And then the other comment that I want to share, just from the first page, is that for me, I'd like to see, are we doing a month-over-month change? And then a separate side that says, give me the year trend and what that might look like from past years. You did that in a couple others in the academic side, but from the enrollment side, this doesn't tell me like, oh, we went up 200 students this year. You know what I mean?
Yep, and
So,
so the plan is, just so you guys are aware, this kind of is going to be in a PDF, and it'll be housed, and then next year we will have another one, and so you could look at last year's, and you could look at this year's, and we'll start to build out those trends. So I know that doesn't answer it right now, but
Yeah.
this, what you were just asking for, would make the 12-page document, I think, into 24, and it
Yeah.
just gets longer and longer, so at what point, so I was having to narrow some stuff down on
Yep.
the dashboard, just because we could have gotten too long, and then I've lost people by page 1.
Yeah.
So.
Can I add one thing,
Yep.
Brian? When Bill does his report after October 1 to the board, it shows just the very basic trajectory of our growth. So you'll see
Yeah.
like the overall growth during that report.
Yep.
And it does show capacity.
Yeah,
You
I've
give
seen
it
it
for
on
each elementary school, right? Like,
There's also always room for improvement, so I'll take the feedback too.
No, yep.
All right, so the attendance. So attendance, we talked about attendance for kids as well as the adults, because there's two big components. We can't teach kids if we don't have adults in the building to do so. And so you can see we have attendance, consistent attendance by grade. There is that dotted line that goes across because we need to make sure our kids are there 90% of the time. It's considered chronically absent if they fall below that 90%. So that's where that red dotted line shows up in quite a few of the graphs that you're going to see on the attendance. We also had it by month, because by month things do vary. Trips are high at certain months, vacations are high, holidays are also high. And then you can see we have licensed staff as well as paraprofessional staff. So these are the absences, the number of absences. So this could be because of professional development, it could be because of sick days, and it also could be because of vacations that those staff members have taken.
Does that seem high? I mean, I'm just curious. I'm looking at this, and we only have 1,100 FTEs, right? And you got almost 1,000 of them everyone's taking a day off every year or every month. Is that how I'm reading this?
It could be, or you have one particular staff member that's taken quite a few. It also takes into account if you have, maternity, paternity, those types of things as well. So those are all things that could go, and you could dig into these a lot
Yeah.
bigger, but it's again, to the point that I was making, it's really looking at the collection of data to look and drive our ideas and what we want to do to move forward, not just the one particular. Buildings and, cabinet do have ability to go in and dive in and answer a lot of those questions.
So just for clarity, like in September, the number of licensed staff absences for September, 881. If I was gone for 2 weeks, am I counted 14?
Well, 10 days because you're not
10
working on the
days,
weekends, but
yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So that's 10 days for me.
Correct.
So,
So we might have certain
so
staff
maybe-
members
so
that are
that's
represented
number of
very high.
licensed staff daily absences by, no, wait, so.
That's monthly.
I think that, yeah, monthly, but it's per day.
Yes.
So 881 days that we had to find a sub.
But as she
It could
said,
be-
it could be like a maternity leave and they're gone.
already have
They're gone.
long-term
And there's already a sub
Days.
there,
Got it.
yeah.
Yeah, so we already have
Could it
subs
be
in
for
place,
professional
so-
development?
It could be, yep, so
Yes.
sometimes we are pulling them for professional development because we need
Exactly.
teachers to be
Yes.
able to help us plan as well.
Thank
So
you.
it's,
Yeah,
all of the
so-
absences were combined together, they were not spliced out.
Correct.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's why it looks bigger than what it really is.
Yes.
All right.
It's not people. it's-
So then we have this student attendance rate by day, as well as the staff attendance rate by day. So you're talking about what days of the week. We see these highs and lows. And then the attendance rate of students by demographics. Then we get into major behaviors. Now, major behaviors are the things that we're reporting to the state. It's really around like our DERS reporting, so it's like bullying or harassment or those types of major behaviors that often the administrators are taking account of. I am going to put a big caution in here that there was a lot of work that was done in our student services department around major behaviors that really did adjust, and those really took place around November. So where you see the spike in the behaviors is because we did a lot of work of reorganizing our data, and so there is a little bit of inconsistency in here when you're looking, and I just want to call attention to that. So now that we have a better way of tracking that, we have a student management system that we're working with, you can then see it's more accurate as it goes through where our highs and lows are. Incidents and responses are two different things. These are the incidents or behaviors that our kids are displaying, and then the responses of how administration has handled those behaviors within the schools.
I think this is one that I would appreciate seeing one in the annual so that we can see. I mean, is there more, or as the years progress, do we see a trend going upwards? Now, obviously, the more kids you're going to have, the higher number of incidents, so it has to be weighted in some capacity, but this is helpful. Thank you.
Yep. And again, these incidents, as we're going through, we're doing a better job of tracking it. I do expect these numbers to increase the next year just because of the way that we're following rules and we have more structure around this. So I do anticipate that going up.
Yeah, this will really be our first year where we have more consistent and accurate tracking because of the work of student services and Dave and Megan Vlasic in particular with our administrators to help them understand what it is and how they should be documenting things so that we can have accurate data.
So can we plan on having occasional presentations about, I mean, not just this dashboard thing, but just updated information about how interventions are going or those kinds of things? Is that what we should do?
So there's a timeline that we have built out that for board meetings that we'll have updated. So we'll have this current year coming, so October 1, like you've mentioned, is a big time frame that we'll be able to update different parts. This will not look as complete as we're going throughout the year because we're going to get more information as you go in. So there is a schedule that we've worked on to kind of lay out when the data will be released. After universal screening is another good time to add in different components. But again, it won't look like this till this time next year because we have all the pieces because the year ended. So, yes. So then you can see down here, it's major incidents by race and how that compares to our demographics, as well as the level of where incidents are occurring. And I want to call out this as major incidents, and that's why you're not seeing as many in the elementary. And so I just want to make sure I call that to your attention.
Any particular reason why we want to highlight this?
By students?
I mean, an incident is an incident in my mind, and so. All right.
Brian, are you saying that the first slides were good, and why are we going deeper with the major incidents?
No, I think it, no, I'll take this offline. That's fine.
So then we get into the academics. Normally when we come and present, we're talking only MCAs, but MCAs are not the only reason or the only thing that we do with academics and screening our kids and knowing where they're at. And so you can see we have reading universal screening data. Last year, we used both the FastBridge assessment system and MAP assessment system. So depending on the grade, it might be two different assessments that you are looking at. You can see we have tested in fall, winter, and spring in some of the grade levels, and just fall and spring in the others. This coming year will be all three for all three grade levels across the board. So you can see those trends, and you can see as well as in math. So these are not MCA, these are universal screeners with a different company. We also look at growth, and this is talking about from the 2 cycles of testing. So in this case, we're talking fall to spring. And there's a red dotted line that's really important I want to draw your attention to. Statistically, the way these companies work, for our grades 2 through 8, 50% growth is what's statistically supposed to happen. So even though that number seems low, that is statistically accurate. It's for grades K1, 60% is what you're looking at based on how the testing company has made their assessment. So I don't want you to think that 50% of our kids are on grade level. This is talking about growth, and if 50% made growth, we are hitting exactly the mark that we should be making. Then we're going to get into the MCAs, and we have a presentation to dive a little bit more deeper that goes into MCAs on past years and present years and things like that, which is the more traditional presentation that we do every year. The red kind of grayed out background, that's last year's, and the reason I put that on there is because oftentimes with MCAs, we look to see the longitudinal trend year over year. So even though you're seeing 5th grade in a previous year and this year, those are not the same pocket of kids, so I want to call your attention to that. That's 5th graders from last year compared to your 5th graders this year. So you can see kind of the trend as to where we were from the previous year to this year, as well as the participation rates. It's very important to look at that because not all our students participate in testing. That's a trend that's across the state. That's not unique to Lakeville. So this is not encompassing all of our kids.
Is the participation rate going down for some of those higher grades?
Yes, it is, and I have slides on that when we start talking about it.
Those are good slides.
Yeah, that's part of the, yeah.
So they have the option to do that.
It's, the state requires that they have the option, so we have to post that there is an option for parents and families. However, according to ESSA, the state really does need 90% participation.
Yeah.
So we don't encourage the parent refusal, but we have to provide it to our families as an option.
Is this something that we are going to see, like, this broken down more by demographics?
Yep.
Okay.
So we have more information on the next couple slides.
For the MCAs specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
We also take MCA in science, and we also, we don't always present about it, but the Access is our language ability test, and so it's really the only way kids can exit the EL programming. And so I wanted to put that information on there because our EL population is growing, and we need to be aware of these kids that are through our system and how they are progressing in their program. We also give ACTs. So these are our ACT scores. This is also broken down by demographics as well. This is grade 11. Then we get into the academics with failing grades. So we're talking about kids that are failing grades in subjects, all subjects. It's not just calling attention to one. And if you're wondering what subjects are the most failed, you can see below where they're at. A caution I'm going to throw out to the high school is that it's broken down by semesters. So every kid has, because it's semester, you have 2 failures if you failed the entire year. Whereas in middle school, you'd only have 1. So those numbers look higher at the high school than they are, but it's because of that semester-based grading.
Look at all the math.
We also take advanced placement test. We take advanced placement test in many of our, in many different subjects, and you can see the percentage of students getting a 3 or above, which is when you most likely are considered for college credit. We do have interventions. We do document some of these, but it's not consistent yet across our district. So these are not all of the interventions that are going on. These are the schools right now that are at this point documenting those within the system. That system is really set up for elementary right now. We are working on getting that more in the middle schools, but that's why you're not seeing it here, is because we're still building that system out. You're also going to see it's in reading because that's where we started. And so reading is a little bit ahead on the intervention side because of that reason. Then we get into the student experiences, opportunities, and adult actions. I know these are small. Hope you brought your iPad so you can use that zoom in tool and you can actually see, but these are all the questions that we ask. We use that system called Panorama. That was a student survey that we asked information about our kids on to what's their sense of belonging, how are they feeling. So it's each of the questions and the rate of what kids responded. The survey is broken out between 3-5 and 6-12. And so it's separated all the way through because it is different questions because of their age and reading ability level. We asked additional questions on emotional regulation, as well as teacher-student relationships. And then we took that survey and we also asked our staff. And we asked it around the staff daily desired experiences, which is with our operational plan, or sorry, strategic plan.
How often is this survey shared or sent out?
It's given once a year.
Once a year.
And so we're working on getting that all taken care of. We cannot break this down because of our policy 520. So it's very much high, overarching, just what are our kids experiencing in these grade levels, and that's all the more we can do.
What is the response rate typically for?
For these, it's very high because it's given during the school day. I can't go in and tell because I'm not able to see who has taken it or who hasn't. A kid could technically take it twice, and we would not know. So
is it optional?
It's not necessarily optional, but if a kid sits there and never hits send, we will not ever know.
So do we tell them it's optional?
No.
Do we let parents know that this is being done?
Yes.
And do we let them know it's optional?
Well, I guess they can opt out like any of the assessments. There's kids that always, like, just with FastBridge, there's some kids that just don't take the assessments, so
Yeah, so we
parents.
have sent out in the past communication to parents, as well as posted the questions online, so parents can go and review the questions, and if they were not comfortable with their student taking the assessment, they can just opt out. So,
Okay.
and that's been our past practice based on our policy.
So we send out communications ahead of time?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about that, there was a spot that kids could go if they were not comfortable in this room this past year. I think we've kind of worked on that because the policy changed, that's why my memory's a little foggy, because it's changed from past years. So there is communication that goes out, multiple communication that goes out, and then there was a location that kids could go to if they didn't feel comfortable sitting in that room while this was going on.
What about teacher response rate? Is it
The teacher response rate it's high. Teachers like to know that we're giving response. I'd have to go back and find exactly that information, but if you need me to, I can find that percentage.
My recollection was that there was some variation between buildings depending on some principals provided time during a PD day or other, for staff to be able to do that. And of course, you get a higher response rate. But for the most part, it was pretty high.
Just so board members are aware, as we're keeping track of our agenda, we have about 3 minutes left on this discussion, so.
Then we get into the World's Best Workforce. The World's Best Workforce has 5 different goals, and I want to be very cautious when we're talking about this, is goals are different than growth. We can still make growth in these areas but not meet goals. So when the goals were planned out, we could have been more aggressive in certain areas than not. So when you're going through each of these goals, I just want you to be mindful that growth still could have been made, but the goal might not have been achieved. This is a 1-year goal that we go through, so you can see there is 5 different components. Goal 3 is actually connected to our achievement and integration plan. So you don't see the graphs up top because the graphs are down below. So here's our achievement and integration plan. We have 4 goals as well. A new plan has just started because this is the 3-year plan. It ended in the spring. We're now operating under our new plan, so the final year has happened. And you can see, I can't scroll anymore. I got to the end.
All right. Do you have any further questions on Terry?
Just one, when something is updated to make it current, can it be labeled that somehow on there? Because if you look through there, now the MCAs are on there because that's updated. We know that. But when you update something, is there a way of putting the date somewhere on there so we know it's updated?
So you're going to see, we're going to change these all to PDFs, so you'll be able to see the updates, and you'll be able to see new graphs appear, because it's going to be short, this next one that you see, because we don't have a lot of data, because we're at the beginning of the
We're
year.
starting
Right.
over, yeah.
Oh, you're starting over.
We're
Got
starting
it.
over, so
Okay.
everything will be new, so anytime you see anything new on the
I thought you were going
dashboard-
to leave it and change it.
No, this was just
Got
an
it.
example
Yeah.
of
Okay.
what we will be providing you on an ongoing basis throughout the course of the year.
Thank you.
Wonderful work, thank you.
Thank you.
I like the graphs. I mean, I think the graphs are good because it allows us to provide, to see the visual, the trends and so forth. And so, I think there's a lot of good data elements in here. I think from my point of view, it's not an executive dashboard. And so, I would like to see more tactical things around, the finance section is missing here, the number of HR people is missing here, the resource utilization mix. So when I think of this, I'm like, we've got good components in here that I think would feed into that 2 to 3 page executive dashboard. Like, I'm not going to read 12 pages. Let me rephrase that. Reading 12 pages is lengthy, and some of the data doesn't actually get refreshed. So how do we show month over month changes for those that do change? And then how do we have something next to it that says, here are the year over year changes, so we can see a macro view and the monthly view of the things that are more tangible that we can see. That is what
And here's
I'm
what I
looking
would say to
for.
that. Number one, if that's what the whole board wants, not just one person, then we can take a look at that. But as Emily and Cheryl said, you're going to see the refreshed information as it gets refreshed. So you will see the items that change as they change.
Are there others
in
that are
real
in line
time.
with what I'm looking for, or no?
Like the financial information would.
The financial information is something separate that
Right.
Bill is working on.
Okay.
And so he's got that finished, and that'll be one of the next ones that he shows. This was from the vantage point of what you as a board asked for, related to the demographics, the academics, some of the other things that you talked about. What's measurable? What do you use as you're making decisions about resources and support and academic changes? That's what this one is. The financial component is another one that Bill has been working on.
Okay.
And it's also,
If
this
it gets
was,
refreshed, though, will we, like Terry was asking, will we know what it was the month before? 'Cause I'm
Yes.
we're not gonna look it up.
Yeah,
No,
no,
it'll
you'll
be-
see it.
It'll be blank. So, not blank. This was from last year. This is
Okay.
all last year's data.
Yep.
So, starting October 1, you will just see the new
I know, but what he's
information.
saying is how is he gonna be able to
Yeah.
compare it?
I don't want to open
Thank you.
another PDF for 26
She's my
pages to go look
Yeah.
back and forth.
So then-
And if nothing else, what Cheryl and
We're actually
Emily
more on
can
the same
do,
page as you.
if nothing else, what Cheryl and Emily can do is say, hey, here's items that are being updated to Kim, and we can make sure they're included in the WAU that we update with you monthly, moving forward, so you know which items have had
The
change.
year-over-year updates,
So
changes.
we can give you a list of what's changed, plus you'll be able to go in and take a look and see the difference yourself.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
We're gonna try.
I think it's also really important that, you know, there's multiple purpose than just the people around this table that are using this. We have building administrators and building leaders and things like that. So it's important that even though the finances are really important, we have a lot of people that are actually using this within the buildings, and that information might not be relevant to the other people that are using it as well. Not
Totally
saying
makes
it's not
sense.
important.
Yep.
It's just maybe not.
So I
So
see
you guys would
this,
have your own goal.
I see this funneling very well into helping us with the KPIs and the direction of our strategic plan.
Yeah.
And the successes academically, and where to put the resources, where they're needed from an academic and a learning and a support process for our kids. So I see that. And then I think the other stuff, I mean, I get that Bill's working on that separately too, but that's out there in our annual report, and we get the quarterly updates. And there's a lot of financial information out there that has all the information that we need as board members, I think. So I think this is
There is, but we're
fabulous.
also trying to break some of that down, because
To make it
this is a
easier.
lot of information
Yep.
out there that can be utilized. What he's gonna put together hopefully will give you the same type of overview and direction, but can
Yep.
also be utilized in different areas as we take a look at, hey, if we're gonna make some adjustments academically to, when you get to MCAs, we need to do something about math. What resources are we gonna do, and how do we get those resources allocated out of our budget to be able to make sure that we're addressing particular areas of growth? Does that make sense? So you should be able to have the academic, the strategic plan data, and then you also have to have the foundational components related to the financial side, and so Bill's been working on that. And I think he just about got that
Yeah, I think
finished.
we'll have, yeah.
But he's also waiting for the auditor to have everything finished so he can bring you the audit and that information.
I'm glad this is helpful. I mean, let me rephrase it. It was helpful for me to learn this, and I'm glad that the district as a whole can leverage some of these data components. Again, my point of view as a board member is not in line with what I'm looking for as a school board member. So, but we're making progress, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the next topic of discussion, which is the MCA update. You're doing that one as well?
Cheryl and Emily, you have that one as well?
Yes, we do. We're ready to go. It's up there.
Should say guest, it should just say member today.
Join the crew.
Okay, so every year we go through our assessment data around our MCAs and access testing. So this slide deck is very similar to in years past with very similar data that you guys have seen in structure. Okay, first thing I just want to do is put a caution to this. You guys have just seen that we do pull assessment data in many different ways. It's not just regarding the MCA. The MCA is one day, one snapshot in time, and our participation rates do vary. So I want to make sure that we all are under that understanding when we're looking at these results. We are looking really more at a summarized level, not at an individual school, student level, because that's really what we're trying to do for the MCAs is program evaluation is really the purpose, not student evaluation. Big arching summary about what you're going to see. Like years past, we've remained above the state average in every grade in every subject. That has not changed. Both Lakeville and the state have not returned to pre-pandemic levels. So we're still not back to 2019 before the pandemic. And participation rates have continued to decline, especially when we're talking about high school level.
So just
Yes.
a question about that. So if they don't participate, how is that marked in our, like, is that marked as like a failure?
It goes against,
Okay.
so it's a denominator, right? It's a fraction.
Right.
It's this many kids passed over this many kids that should have taken the test.
Okay.
And so since they did not show up, our denominator is high and our numerator is small.
So our science scores in 11th grade with 40 or 60% participating in the test are lower than they really are.
Or they could be higher. We have a lot of PSEO students.
I meant they're higher than they normally
They
are.
could be, because it depends on who's taking the test or not taking the test.
So the way they're formulating this, or
Yeah.
calculating this is junk. I mean, is that,
Yeah.
is it not valid data? Let's call it spade a spade.
It doesn't give us an accurate
Doesn't give you an accurate picture.
And especially when we're talking about 50% participation rate, and
Yeah.
then you
50%
have
kids
those
don't
counted
take it.
against you, it becomes very difficult for us to be able to utilize this data from a program evaluation standpoint, because to Cheryl's point and to Terry's point, we don't know who's opting out, and so we can't even make an educated guess in terms of, is it our PSEO students who aren't taking the test, or is it students that struggle in that subject area that aren't taking the test? So we, again, it's a piece of information that we utilize to drive change and continuous improvement and program evaluation. And at the same time, we just have to be very, very cautious that we're not misusing data and drawing conclusions that are not accurate and putting in strategies that then would not be successful. Which is why you have 12 pages of other data, because again, I don't want to discount this, but I just want to.
It's not valid data.
It is,
Right.
it is an incomplete picture of the performance of our students in this district. So with that, I will turn it back to
But
you.
not-
And I would add, go ahead, Dave.
But not to be obvious, I mean, I was talking to Judy about it, if we can't force them to test, and then we get penalized for it, that's
Yeah,
stupid.
well, do we get penalized for it? Like,
We do.
how is this?
That's
data-
stupid.
Because
how
For
is
the
it's
this-
a
legislators
reflection
and
of the
governors
scores.
listening, that's stupid.
But here's the other thing that you need to take into account too. So for special education families, a lot of them
They don't
opt
do that
out
anymore, though.
because there used to be a second
Yeah.
MTOS. Like, so there was the MTOS, and that is for students that have cognitive disabilities. And then there was one right here for students that were more like learning disabled, like we're not quite to grade level, but we have one that works for us. They did away with this test. So then now there's only two options, and there's no in between. So there's a lot of students that are specific learning disability that do opt out of testing because that option was taken
And
away.
another component, kids nowadays are, what's the incentive for me to take it?
Yeah.
So they may be taking the test, but are they really giving 100% of that test because they don't get a grade in the grade book, or they don't get an incentive to do it? The kids who are intrinsically motivated are going to do it, but the kids who walk through the process like, it doesn't benefit me, are going to give you A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. You know, they're going to go through that process. So it does invalidate some of it, but like with anything, it's one of the measurements that you have to use, and that's what the state uses in order to say, well, how are you performing as a district? Which, if as you've heard me speak, one test does not.
Because some
define
kids,
the
some
definition
kids
maybe.
don't, even if they try, don't do well at that test.
No, some of it's a different
I sucked.
learning
I did well
aspect
at
than
grade
they're
point
used to.
average.
Yeah.
So let me make this statement to make sure I understand it. If there are 10 kids, if 5 of them took the test and the other 5 did not, whatever the score of those 5 students got would be then averaged out of a total of 10 students.
Correct.
So the scores that we're seeing, is it averaging out of the, averaging the 11,800 students that we have in our school?
The school, in the students in that particular grade level.
Or
that take the
students in
test,
that
yeah.
grade level? Based on our chart, you know, you've got
And we don't
843.
have the information, you can't break it down, like take it separately for the students, but that only.
We can, we know who did refusals. But then it's tracking them, knowing which courses they're taking, and it's a lot more digging down.
Well, then can we take them out of the denominator and then
That's not
recalculate?
what's publicly posted, that's part of the problem. And so then if we start talking about that, it doesn't match up the Minnesota report card, that gets very confusing, and it's already a confusing message.
People say,
to
why
begin
did you
with.
tweak your data? Because the
Make
state's
it look
posted
better.
this, so you've now.
So then we need the legislature to change how we
Yes.
report these rules.
I feel like
Or we just
Or
build it
test.
off of growth instead of off the.
Don't agree with me again.
I feel,
That's fine.
I'm just only gonna, respectful dialogue, okay. So.
Thank you, thank you.
It's, for me, it's important for us as a board to understand that. So that might not
Yeah.
be something we publish on our website, but is that information that we can get to kind of understand if the interventions you're doing are working or those kinds of things?
It would have to be all raw. There's nothing that just populates some of this stuff out. And then you're gonna get into, does it count if a kid moved in 1 week before the test? At what point does it count? Does that kid count towards the denominator? There's a lot more factors
Yeah.
than just, did you take it, did you not?
Yep.
And so those are, and then how far and how much time do we spend diving into this one test to get that information when we have a lot of other measurement systems that are also giving us information about our kids.
Right.
And so
We
those
should have a
are
disclaimer.
the.
If we don't have a disclaimer on our website, we probably should, to say, these are how many kids that took it, here's a score, MCA divided it by 11,000, however many students in that grade, and that's how they got the score. So hopefully, if someone reads the disclaimer, they can get to the conclusion of like, why would you divide it by so many more kids that didn't take the test? That doesn't make sense, but.
We say all
Right?
that to say, this is an imperfect measurement.
Yeah.
There is no perfect measurement, and the kid comes to school to take the test today who's just had their dog pass away. That's to take the test on that day. It's not going to give you the same score as a kid.
Bad
who,
data, let's just call it
you know,
what it is.
This is why we use multiple means.
Multiple measures.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep, so here is the refusal rate, so you can see at the high schools, like I was saying, it has jumped up quite a bit, especially since the pandemic. That really, because the pandemic, it was more optional at that time, there was less penalties and things like that. So that really opened the floodgates to have this occur in the way it did. High schools also, not every single grade takes this test, so that's also something to consider when you're looking at this.
I like this trend.
You can also see our 5-year district and state proficiency. So district, we are in the light blue, state's in the red. You're talking about reading, math, and science, and I put in there a big green line that says COVID, because I think we might forget sometimes when we're looking at this 5-year trend that there was a year in there that we did not take the test. And you can also see our data changes very rapidly before COVID and after COVID. And so we have not come back to, again, the pre-pandemic levels of where we were.
And we don't even know if the previous slide showed how many people chose not to take the test. And so by them not taking it could automatically give you the reduction where technically we could be flat, if not higher. We don't know.
Yeah, we just don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm going to break it down by each subject. So now we're into reading. And in reading, you can see the participation rates by the grades. Okay, so elementary is much higher. Then we're going to break it down between district and state. So again, the state's in that kind of shaded on these graphs here. It's in that shaded red. As you can see, our district is above in every single grade for our reading. Then you can see the 5-year proficiency in reading by grade. Again, there's a gap between each of these, and that gap is that COVID year where MCAs was not done. It's also important we look at cohort data. And when I'm talking about cohort data, I'm talking about the same group of kids as they're progressing through our system. So grade 10, reading is the oldest kids that take reading in our system. So we backed those kids back through the year. So it's the same population of kid minus the moves in and the moves out that occur between grades. And it's talking about how did these kids perform on grade 3 as they're going up to grade 10. Proficiency is the green and blue together. The state does break it down into 4 different categories, and so it's good to look at how those categories are changing as the years over, as the trends happen. But again, there is participation differences between these groups. Same groups of kids, not always the same groups of kids that participated. So the math, talking again about the participation rates, so you know kind of percentage-wise who's participating in these tests. And then our math proficiency of the district compared to the state. Again, we are above the state average in every single grade. And then you can see the 5-year math proficiency by grade. It was hard to fit that all on a slide. I'm sorry that you're turning your head. The before COVID year really needed to get in there, and it made the graph a little wider.
Yeah, that's okay.
And then for math, it's grade 11 is our oldest grade that takes this. So this is our last year's grade 11, current grade 12. And it's how did they progress through our system with math. Again, I'm going to caution you that the participation rates do drop quite a bit in the high school. So then when we move into science, you can see the participation rates as well. With science, there's only 3 grade levels that take science, 5th, 8th, and high school. High school is done, biology is the year that you're taking biology. So that could be 9th, could be 10th, it might be some of our 11th graders that are struggling to complete that course. And you can see the proficiency by the state and by our district. Again, we are ahead of the state in every grade. We have the 5-year proficiency, the 5-year trend. And then the cohort data. This was the best we could do with the kids that we have. So these are our grade 10, so that's usually the year you're taking this test at the high school level. And then we have what they scored in grade 8 and grade 5. Then I also added in the access slide. Again, this is kind of a new thing that I wanted to kind of show you guys just because I want you to see that over 5% of our kids are taking this test, and this is the only way we can access students from the EL programming. You have to score proficiency level in all the categories in order to move forward. So it's important that as we're looking at this, this does affect funding, this does affect staffing and all of those things in our buildings. So you can see over time our trend, again, the state average. It takes a while for these kids to reach proficiency when they're learning a language. So that's why these are lower than they are with the MCAs. And so it might take kids 4 or 5 years to reach that level. And you can see what it considers at the bottom. I put what proficiency means is that you have to meet the composite score of at least 4.5 within the domains.
Can they opt out of this as well? Is this data
If they
skewed?
opt out, which some of them do,
Yeah.
they are stuck in EL programming. And we have kids in our system that are like that. That might be grade 12 because they haven't taken this test. This is the only way a kid can exit is by taking this test.
So the data is inaccurate. I mean, how many
More
people opt out?
kids, this is more incentive to go in and do this test because there's a reason behind it, because it's a program exit.
Yep.
So more kids do participate, but not all kids.
Got it.
That's my last slide.
All right. Any more questions?
I had just one.
Sure.
All the data we've had, has the district decided what area or areas are going to emphasize this year to get better on the MCAs?
Well, certainly math and literacy are our 2 top areas right now. We have provided, we did during our leadership days provide the buildings their data. So they have all worked with their leadership teams to develop their own continuous improvement plans. We are required for a number of reasons to always have a literacy goal, so that always exists in the system.
Right.
And then we're looking at math as well. And obviously, you can see, even with the, from the previous dashboard, that there are some courses in particular that we need to do some work around because students just aren't being successful. So we're talking about how we can provide some better supports there, because if they're failing a course, then they're obviously not going to perform well on any kind of assessment.
You know, all districts have these same issues with the attendance and everything else, and scores going down. So if I look at comparable districts to us, we're not doing too badly. I mean, we're still dropping as everybody else is. Some of the more affluent districts have dropped a much greater percentage than we did this year. I was very surprised to see that. If we compare ourselves with neighboring districts, at least 2 out of 3 categories, we are better than our neighbors. Sometimes all 3 categories than our neighbors. So we're doing, compared with other comparable districts, we're in the middle of the pack, we're okay. But if you look at math, that's one area, it seemed to me, that we were down with comparable districts.
Yeah.
Even though our scores went up.
And Emily, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the issue for us as well is the state has been supposedly working on math curriculum and math standards, and they haven't gotten to that. They haven't gotten,
Yes,
and so
exactly.
we've been continuing to work off of old resources and old supports because you don't want this going.
2009?
Or eventually, yeah.
It's quite a while. So that is supposedly coming to an end here, that the state is about to make their decision, correct me if I'm wrong on.
Oh, that's
the
kinda
math
tough.
Aspect of that. And they've already started working on taking a look at what resources and supports can we look at probably purchasing to help our staff as well and our students, because we are working with some resources that are out of date.
Yes.
in my opinion.
Extremely out of date.
And so part of that is we have to make sure our instructional strategies are where they need to be, but part of that is also the state hasn't helped us by dragging their feet on setting what their standards are gonna look like, so we're working kind of.
But we can
backwards, if
use,
that makes
we
sense.
can use map data to find out what areas were low in math, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes, I
so
mean,
if we're in elementary or low in one or two areas, we could emphasize that at the building level. If-
Yeah, we've
if-
moved away from map, we're doing Fast Bridge now
Okay.
take a look at that, but.
I think it still has a breakdown
Yeah,
the same.
what I can say is that those are really the assessments that we want to utilize to be able to work with individual students on their own, where they're, identify where they're
Where they're
starting
at.
and plug in intervention. We can't do that MCA as one time a year, and it's not really valid, as many of you have pointed out, so it doesn't have a high level of use for us. I think a couple things we're a little bit farther along, in terms of, the elementary math standards don't change significantly really from year to year. So that group is a little bit further along. Our resources are 20 years old. They're, in fact, out of print. And we are not in a place to be able to purchase new resources and then have to purchase different ones because they have
State
changed.
comes
They
out.
changed the
Yeah.
standard. So the timing has been really poor for math. And so we're excited that we're finally going to actually know what our standards are and what our teachers have to teach. But Sandy and Aletta have both been working with teams, and we'll continue to do so that we can sort of beef up not only the resources available, but also the professional development, and then our intervention pieces. So, yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for those comments.
Thank you.
Any other comments from board members? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cheryl.
All right, so policy review, I'm assuming that's Brenda.
Yes.
It's like magic.
We have 3 tonight, they should be pretty easy.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, the MCA one, so it's fascinating to hear. I heard that this was an issue, but
Okay, so policy 305 is a policy regarding policy implementation. There's one sentence in here that is a change per statute. The other red lines that you see are just the school district board or school board, switching that to the Board of Education. So basically just that one line under section 2, item A, that is a statute change. That's the only change to that policy. Any questions? All right. And then the next policy is.
Why don't I handle those out for you? Then you
306,
don't- you don't
thank
have
you.
to-
Thank you.
And I can do them all. I just
Oh,
lay 'em out
perfect,
there.
okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next policy.
I do have a question on the, section A. Can you share with me what that sentence means, like at least annually? You're talking about this document needs to be reviewed annually?
The policy.
Got it.
yep.
You can use mine.
Are you okay if I move on to 306? for you?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, thank you.
Okay, 306 is, oh, that's the one you just handed out, that's the
Yep.
next one. that
Okay.
final one. Yep, okay, so 306 is Administrator Code of Ethics. You'll see that Section 2, Item B is red underlined, that is all new language. I did go in and I pulled up this specific statute because on the next page, you'll see all of the red strikeout. And this is change verbatim to what is in statute. So if you pull up the statute, you will see exactly what is in the policy.
So can I just ask,
Yep.
what was the history behind this? Do you know why all these changes were added?
I do not know, no.
Just
And if
seems-
you-
It just seems like a lot.
Yeah, if you look at, if you look at B1, makes the well-being of students and the fundamental value of all decision-making, and you turn it over, you can see that it's just.
Nothing on the other side.
You don't have anything on the back side.
Is that, 306?
Yeah, there's nothing.
Yep.
on
Oh,
this.
I'm sorry, I missed the copy, so, shoot.
That's cool.
We can run, make a copy if you want to go through the next one.
Because I'm just looking at like a base, local and state and national laws, that should be pretty basic.
Thank you.
So should we do the next one while he
Yeah,
does
let's
that?
do that. I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, that's,
904?
Done that one before.
904 is distribution of materials on school district property by non-school persons. This one's super easy, the only change is just the school board to Board of Education.
Okay.
So that's it on that
That's
one.
nice.
And on the other one, when you see the flip side, you'll see it's just, the language that's stricken on the other side is just more antiquated language.
I think what this does is bullet points that very specifically and clearly, because wasn't it really like paragraphs and really wordy on the
It's-
other one?
It's bullet pointed as well, but it's,
Okay.
the language is, like I said, it's just more, it's not as clear
Okay.
as the new language. But, I mean, it's really about it. It looks like it's a lot of change.
It gives the Department of Education more flexibility to hold principals accountable. Is my interpretation.
Did you get a double-sided copy?
No, he's looking at the other one.
Oh.
I'm looking at that.
Kim went to do the other side.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read his comment.
So you already did 904.
Yeah,
That's
that
just
was-
Yeah, that was
board
just that
changes.
one change. And then,
Do you want a cough drop?
Pardon?
Do you want a cough drop?
I've had two already.
Okay.
So I guess
You
while
and I
we
have the
wait-
same issue, right?
You made me sick.
You want us-
Yeah.
While we're waiting on 305 and 904, especially 904, since it's just the school board change, I could put that on the consent agenda. What would you like me to do for 305? Do you want that on consent agenda? Would you like me to do a report for that?
I think
I think
for clarity for the
consent-
public, since it's different, that we should put it as a report.
Like
Just
a-
for
Like a
transparency.
37-second report?
Yes, yeah, she doesn't have to read the whole thing.
Good.
Okay.
Just for the sentence added, you mean?
This whole section.
oh,
Oh.
that, no, the
No.
sentence, we're on 305.
We're on 305.
Yep.
306 might be different. You might need a little report.
Well, if you're only, I mean, if you're doing 306, you might as well do 305 too, is
right.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to step on your toes.
Well, thank you.
I don't have someone interpreting for me like you do. Sorry, I took your job away. Take your job away after you.
That was a good one. That was pretty good.
Is that good?
That
That's
was
good,
pretty
right?
good.
Just don't be played.
Just keep on schedule. Let's go.
No, did I
Thank
just
you.
not
Okay.
do the original? Okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's okay.
I do have
That's what I thought.
I've got a comment on 305 if we can. So, one of the best practices that I've seen is that when new initiatives get kicked off or changes are implemented for whatever reason, there's always some sort of feedback loop or some sort of, hey, how did it go? Or what did you do? Or are there any minor changes that we need to make or anything like that? And so I'm wondering if in 305, we need to add some sort of commentary or another section where, yes, the superintendent to implement the school district policies and obviously make recommendations. I don't know if it's more tactical to say, hey, how do we know that it went well, or how do we know it got implemented, or how do we know that there is no like feedback loop? Does that make sense? And maybe I'm not sharing this correctly.
I understand what you're saying.
You know what I
but
mean?
in my world, that's to me part of the implementation process is after you implement it.
Yep.
Part of the implementation is to go back 30, 60,
No.
90 days, a year from
Yes.
now.
Yep.
To revisit and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing and seeing if any tweaks need to be done. So I believe that's part of the implementation process because the expectation is once it is implemented, we need to know that it's working.
Well, that's why I kind of asked the question, the reason behind all these changes.
Yeah, no, I know, but specifically to what Brian is saying, I believe that's part of the implementation. And I don't know, do you see that as implementation? It's not just putting it into place, it's also making sure it's working effectively and doing any necessary tweaks if it's not, right?
Well, again, I think it depends, because of some of your policies are changed statutorily, so that if it
Yeah.
changes or not, I'm not going to be able to come to you and say, hey, this statute's good or this statute's bad. If there's some procedural change that takes place because of the change in policy, then I think that's a measurable component.
Correct.
We can say either, like, for example, when we were talking about the discipline component that's going to be coming to you next month.
Yep.
That policy got changed, but here's the procedural things that now we're going to be putting in place.
Implemented.
And those are the things that are implemented. So I guess that's how I see it, if that makes sense.
I
to
agree, but
what
then-
you're asking.
Yeah, but then part of that implementation is as you're implementing it, if there's things that are uncovered or brought awareness to and need to be tweaked and changed because of those procedures, that's part of the implementation process, is to follow up to make sure.
Yeah, I think anytime you put a
Me.
procedural change in place,
Right.
there's a feedback loop, I think, to Brian's statement
Yeah.
of we implemented the change, how's that going? And so that's part of what happened last year, is they were piloting the whole behavioral aspect of it, is that the things that they put in place, they spent a whole year getting feedback on, how do these procedures look, how's this implementing? And that's what now they're going to be bringing to you, is that follow-up of what they implemented with that. Is that what you guys
Yeah,
are
I
talking
think-
about?
Yeah, I think so. What I'm asking, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do we need to add another paragraph defining implementation and that feedback loop to the board, or is that too tactical and it's not warranted? I get that, like, when we pass a policy, we assume you're gonna just go ahead and do it, right? And so when do we find out, hey, we're gonna do it this month, or we're gonna do it next quarter?
It would be nice to know, it would be nice to know the
the.
results from the
So,
implementation.
Yes.
If I understand this, then this sentence that says the administration is authorized to develop procedures, guidelines, and directives basically for the implementation of the policies. So are you just saying that we can add?
And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that if there's a policy that requires a procedural change, that's going to come, we're going to share that with you, is, hey, based off this policy, we put this procedure in place, and that's what we're implementing. That's kind of what's happening with the discipline.
Yeah.
But there's quite a few policies that don't have a procedural
Agreed.
change to
Yep.
it, it's just a language
Yep.
change or a requirement that we're held statutorily to. So it's not, I'm not going to be, once you put it in place, it's in place, that's what we have to follow.
No, I think, but I think if I understand what Brian is saying, this sentence here about you are authorized to develop these procedures, guidelines, and directives, I think he's
Followed
saying,
by
where does
a-
it come up with the procedures, guidelines, directives, and follow-up to?
Accountability for it.
Update, saying that the
Updates.
project is closed, or we did it.
So where you are putting procedures in place, does the feedback and is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? How is that going to?
Well, I think that's answered by that last part there, when it says it comes to the board for review.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so
Written
it's at
procedures,
least
guidelines, and
annually,
directives, yes.
it comes to the board for like,
These procedures,
this document
guidelines,
is being
directives shall be
reviewed, not the
presented.
procedures that are being implemented.
So-
Is that how you're taking it, Brenda?
Here, let's just read the whole paragraph. It shall be the responsibility of the superintendent to implement Board of Education policy and to recommend additions or modifications thereto. The administration is authorized to develop procedures, guidelines, and directives to effectuate the implementation of Board of Education policies. These procedures, guidelines, and directives shall not be inconsistent with said policies. At least annually, these written procedures, guidelines, and directives shall be presented to the school board for review. So the said policies will be brought forth at least annually with written procedures and guidelines. So the
So it's
school
just
board will-
but it's just for review,
But-
so does that mean we have input on it? Like, what if we don't, I'm not picking it, but like, what if we don't like one of your, procedures or implementation things?
But I think to what Brian's point
Because we got
is.
two topics now.
Yeah, that's two different things. I think what Brian is
I
asking
get on a lot of
for
topics.
is when the procedures and guidelines and directives are established, it's not about reviewing them, it's about reviewing the results of them to
Exact-
make
yeah,
sure that
right.
they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Because I think there are three parts here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Well, it has to do
Policy-
with outcome, right?
Right,
I
so-
mean, it's like an outcome-based.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two parts to it. So, a
I'm
policy
sitting
is
here all the
done.
time.
A policy is
I
done
think
by
I'm sitting
the
here all the
board,
time.
Makes you smarter.
and we look to the superintendent to implement it. And so, once we say, hey, go implement
Yeah,
it.
do
I
that.
just want to be mindful
That's
that
all
it
we
doesn't go
want.
in this like black box. And so, part of the implementation process that you're going to create policies, or you're going to create procedures and handbooks and stuff like that. And the assumption is that you would come back to us and say, hey, here's how we implemented your policy,
Keep reeling them
679 or whatever it might be. That part of coming back to us saying, here's how we implemented, here's what we did, is not listed in policy implementation. And so there is no 8.5. And then the last comment here is that at least annually, the last sentence in red, how I'm reading this is that for any new policy any new procedure that gets implemented, those procedures need to be reviewed annually. Is that how? So that's the two.
What
two
if that
things.
said to the school board for evaluation of implementation, or something like that? Like you're asking for, if some new procedure comes into effect, you want to make sure that we're able to follow up on how that implementation is going to determine whether it's consistent or inconsistent with updated policy or any sort of policy you have in place.
So just to keep us on track, we're about 5 minutes over on this discussion.
We can take this to
So
next week. That's
is
fine.
this a policy that we need to wait on and have more discussion around? Or are you comfortable moving forward with it as is? Because I think we're in discussion of 305, correct?
Yeah, but I
Yes.
think the question that is holding this up is, this is actually about policy implementation. So
Yep.
I think this policy is correct. Somewhere along the line, what's the practice?
Part of the policy implementation, I would assume we would want some reasonable steps of, here are the core themes or core work streams that we assume that you would do in an implementation. Number one, you obviously implement it. Number two, you provide a quick status that it went well or that it's done. And then number three, a quick 90-day check-in. And then it looks to me on the last sentence, any new written policies are reviewed annually. Or any new written procedures are reviewed annually. So, I mean, when we implement when the superintendent implements new policy, this is a guideline, which is pretty vague. I mean, let me rephrase that. It's like, go build me a house. And that's really what it is. So what I'm asking for is, how's the house building going? Did it get done? Did it not get done? I don't know. And so
So what
I
does
want
it need to
more.
say, because it says for review, so what do you feel like, because
What does
what's,
this say for review?
So this
What I'm
is
saying
saying
is
at
that-
least annually, these written procedures, guidelines, and directives shall be presented to the school board for review.
But we can't change that because that's by statute.
Yes, yeah, but that's after the fact the implementation is done.
Yeah, okay.
So let's say
at least annually?
at least annually, right. So we agree on a new policy that
Yeah.
has a procedure that needs to be implemented. And we'll call it policy 306 for now. And we pass it in March. And so, like, after that, when do we find out that it's done?
At least annually.
And so we don't find out until the
Thanks, Carly.
Good
Well,
point.
it's like, I think
I know.
like it's vague because it has to be purposefully vague in terms of some procedures you might
Take longer. Yep.
need monthly or
Yep.
weekly review, or not weekly, but like monthly review versus some we might just review annually depending
Got it.
on what kind of outcome data we're anticipating and
Okay.
expecting.
I think what I'd like to see is some sort of sentence about an update of completion of some sort.
Okay.
But that again, that's
What that
just,
sentence says, though?
To me, that's what it's going to be reviewed. Because just having done this for a while, the likelihood that most policies are going to change a procedure is not great. Unless it's something that's new and then changes legislatively, then 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.9 times out of 10, even your procedural guidance is going to come from MDE or from a legal counsel saying, here's what we would recommend procedurally for you to do. The difference to that would be, like we just talked about with the behavioral aspect of those policies. Those policies really didn't change It was the inconsistency of how the procedures were implemented that caused the issue. So, does that make sense what I'm saying? So that, to come back and say that the policy itself created the change, the policy didn't create the procedural change.
It was the
procedural change
procedure.
that was, the procedure that was out of line based upon the feedback that the school district was getting.
So I think the other thing now, thinking back to the history of things, when policies and procedures are updated and stuff, and we're notified of that, or we put a new policy into place, the typical request of the board is, can you give us an update 6 months from now or a year from now, or can you let us know when the implementation is completed, how it went? So that's really more, because every policy, procedure, and everything is going to be different and require something different. I think that's more up to the board to require or ask for some sort of an update or a follow-up, depending on what that policy is.
And I guess I would say that if a policy gets implemented that you think is going to have a procedural change, and you think, hey, we'd like some feedback on that, then probably at the time of its being voted for approval, then it's probably good to say, hey, it looks like there's going to be a procedural change. Can you give us an update on that particular procedure?
Yeah.
Like an example would be if you change the policy that said, we're now going to transport all of our kindergartners instead of having mileage limitation. You would want to know when the cost of it, when that's going to take place. That may not be a good example, but that's an example I could think of off the top of my head. So it's up to you if you're ready to do something with this one. If you're not, I guess I just need to know where we're going.
You guys can throw it in. I'll noodle on it more, but you don't need me to pass it anyways.
And when it says at least annually, I mean.
Well, we want you comfortable.
Well, I mean, if you have more questions
Because-
about it, like
Yeah,
definitely
Because it's a
see if you
legitimate,
can find
it is
more
very
things
vague.
out.
It's a legitimate.
Well,
Go ahead and add it, let
question.
me review it
But
later.
that's the way the
I don't
policies
wanna-
are, because it really depends on each. I mean, it has to be vague so we can do it.
No, the law, I mean,
Oh,
not-
yeah.
not the policy.
No.
All right, you two, I'm going to end your discussion.
What would you like me to do?
I think just leave it on the agenda for us to vote on. Brian
Yeah.
said that he's going to do some more review of that and see if he can find out more information. Maybe there's, some other policy he can look at. But
Thank you, Brendan.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brenda.
So I'll do a reading of this one
Yeah.
next week.
Yep,
Okay.
that's great.
Okay, now, on the second page that we missed here, so, for example, if you look at 8 on the new language, it says accepts academic degrees or professional certification only from duly accredited institutions. So that's the new language. If
Okay.
you look at J, the language that has been stricken, it says in filling positions requiring licensure shall employ, recommend for employment, and assign only appropriately licensed personnel or persons for whom the school district has been granted a variance by blah, blah, blah. That's where.
And they got rid of the state boards, they can't have that anymore.
Right, so 8 is just, it's saying the same thing without using a full paragraph to say it.
Right. It's clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's easy.
You know, there's
So are you pretty comfortable with this?
Yeah, yes.
With the, I mean, I know we're mandated by change, I just would like to know the legislative history on it, but if you're comfortable, I guess I'm comfortable.
And again, so you need to know what to do with this. Is there anything, well, are we reading the other one? Because I mean, honestly, none of these are changing the intent of the policies at all, right?
Correct.
So the one only changed the word Board of Education, and so we agreed to put that one under the consent agenda because there were really no changes at all to that one. And then the other two, since we're following like the procedure that we had been using for this, which was to put it under as a record in a meeting.
Okay, so 306 and 90, no, 306 and 305.
They took out the word shall a lot too. That's pretty significant.
Oh, yeah, we better say that one.
All
It
right,
is.
so keeping things moving.
Sorry, boss.
Do you have something
I
to
do,
add
so
quickly?
this is probably a sidebar topic, and we can punt it if need be, in regards to 904. So this is distribution of materials on school district property by non-school persons. I know that we have, like the Army and the Air Force, I mean, because they're considered non-school persons, so would this fall within their space? Or would these guidelines be what they have to oblige by? Does that make sense?
If there were,
What are they considered?
well, if they have, let's say, a flyer that they want to go home in a Friday folder or something like that, that would fall under this. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, youth sports.
Anybody, yeah.
Youth sports, Lakeville, Football Association, like anything that's not school. Okay. So I did not come prepared. I did not read this. And so I understand that if it's a statute, if this is Board of
Number
Education
one.
changes.
Number one.
I know.
Sorry, Brian.
I was waiting for the PDF document to be in the email.
All right.
I had to go to the website. No, I would like to read this because I think this is something as a, while I don't want to prevent it from passing because of the minor changes, but I think this is a topic that we should discuss as a board in general around what's our position on distribution of materials on school property by these folks. So I don't know if anyone's actually read all 5 pages yet, but I did not.
If that's the case, why not approve the existing policy, because there's no changes?
Yep.
And then as,
When we're ready to look at policies,
yeah,
I'm okay. I would like to put this on the
good.
list.
Okay,
we're good.
all right. So I'm going to move on to item E, which is review the pay levy.
Right.
Yay, Bill.
Talk about
Still awake over there, my friend?
Okay, as part of the new pay 24 levy, part of that is payments for our LTFM program, which we brought to you in June. What this is, if you look on the second page, top of the page, there'll be a summary there. All this is right now is just a resolution of saying you intend to sell facility maintenance bonds this fall. We'll actually do the sale later. We'll have a call for sale, and then we'll actually have the sale. But in order to get the payments included on this year's levy, I need to have this resolution passed next week, just as you're intending to sell bonds in the future.
Okay.
Okay, so I didn't hear you very loudly. Can you repeat that one more time?
What this resolution is for is to give the school district authority to make payments on new bonds that we will sell in the future. We have to do it now because it needs to be included on the pay 24 levy, the payments in Fund 7, okay, out of our debt service fund. So we're planning to sell bonds for our LTFM projects. It's actually, this is for, the amount you see on here, the 20 million, is for 2 years. It's not just 1 year, okay? But all we're saying is we intend to sell bonds, and it'll be this fall yet. We're kind of hoping interest rates will start coming back, but it hasn't happened yet. So we're to the point now we're going to need to sell those bonds to be ready for our project next summer. So a lot of this is for maintenance and.
It's
This is 100%.
that big report that they gave us.
This is 100% LTFM maintenance projects for the next 2 years.
Yep, all that big slideshow.
Yep. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, and then we'll bring it forward as an action item next week.
So that slideshow, I thought I was under the impression that that was money that we were already receiving through taxes, through property taxes, through whatever. Not selling more bonds.
We sell bonds.
To gather, to do those projects. 'Cause that's different, right?
LTFM comes in 2 pieces. Part of it's in Fund 1, okay, and we receive those funds. Actually, you'll see this here in a minute when we go through the levy. And then part of it, we borrow the bonds and we do the projects and then we pay them off. It's part of our debt plan. And what you'll see in that, way back when we talked last June, and you saw that fluctuation in the LTFM, that's because some years we have more general obligation bonds to pay from the buildings and some from the LTFM, and we try so the payments are flat. That's when you're seeing the fluctuation in the LTFM. But tonight, all we're doing here is borrowing, well, not borrowing, we're saying we're gonna borrow this amount of money. When we come to you in about a month, then we'll update, we'll show you the debt plan and how that rate doesn't change, okay?
So in the existing budget today, we already have a category that we've carved out to pay for payments of
Correct.
this, yeah. So if I think about this in a different light, would be if we don't pass this, then that debt payment wouldn't be on our expense line item.
That's correct.
Okay.
But we also couldn't do our projects.
Then we went to projects.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and then we can't maintain our schools.
But we've got LTFM Fund 1 to maintain our schools. This is asking for
but-
more money to make more changes to our schools.
The changes we're doing, the projects that we have in place, we have a 30-year plan. So those projects are planned out for many years, okay? This is to get enough money to make sure we do those projects. And we are spending about $15 million on a yearly basis on these plans. When we look at the general fund, which we'll talk about in a minute, that's about a little over $6 million in the general fund, okay? So the rest of it has to come from borrowed money, and then we make the payments.
So some projects would be completed, but are much more minimal projects. So your 30-year plan would now bump out to 50 years or 60 years, and you would fall behind. And the likelihood of the expenditures going up becomes greater, because something that's not repaired today, we know what happens if it gets to be a problem later down the road. So that's built into the plan that Bill was talking about, how they finance that 30-year repair plan.
And, you know, part of the situation is we are behind, so it's kind of in a catch-up mode. So we are spending more now than we were just a few years ago.
All right, so let me restate so make sure I understand. You have a certain percent of general fund money that's allocated to LTMFM, and that's like a state law, and a certain percent, and that's roughly $6 million. I'm just making the number up for now. But we have more maintenance work that's necessary to upkeep our properties, and on average, we spend about $20 million a month, give or take. Or I'm sorry, a year, $20 million.
2 years.
We spend about $20 million
2
borrowed
years.
money in 2 years.
Every 2 years, yeah. So $7 extra million. We need to double what we're getting, or we have to double what the state requires us to put into LTFM. Got it. And so in the budget, you've already allocated the payment, and due to interest rates, that payment's not going to go even higher than where we're at, because we're going to borrow more money with different rates, then that would change, the payment would change, right?
Yes, and we'll bring all those details to you before we sell the bonds.
Got it.
You'll get all that
So
information.
this is the right to sell the bonds, and you need this passed by next week.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, next.
Okay, now every year, September 8th, we get information from the state of Minnesota of what our maximum levy can be. Then each September, the board needs to take action on a preliminary levy by the end of the month of September. So we're bringing this to you. Next week, we'll go through the detail again so the public can see what's coming. If you want to just look at the sheet that I handed out to you, you can see the differences of last year to this year, the changes that we are seeing in our levy. So equity revenue. Equity revenue is a revenue the state of Minnesota has put in place when they see that all school districts aren't funded the same. Some districts have a lot more ability to go for operating referendums and get a higher amount. We are not at that amount. We are below that amount. And because we receive this equity revenue. But it is a levy piece. It's not just, here we give you the cash. It is a piece of levy. So you see an increase there of $37,000, and that's mainly based on the increase of our enrollment going into next year. And remember, this money is not for the year that we're in. This is for the fiscal '25 school district, okay? Transition, this is when they made some changes, and to make sure they held everybody harmless, there's some transition money. You see there we have a $15,000, it's an increase of $700 going into the pay 24 levy. Now remember we talked about LOR, this was an amount of money that the state allows districts to levy as an operating levy if they didn't have one. But if you had one already, it rolled in. So as we've had operating levies in the past, up now $700, I should put the number on here, $724 per pupil unit is in the LOR. But it used to be an operating levy for us in the past, but it's permanently rolled into a LOR. You can see there now that amount is at $9.6 million. You're seeing the increase there is because of two reasons. It's because of the inflation we saw the last year, and of course, an increase in our enrollment count. Now, referendum, of course, that is our operating levies that we have left in place. That's moved up to $1,670 per pupil unit. So again, that increase that you're seeing of $1.2 million, that's twofold. The inflation rate that we're receiving going into next year is a little over 4%, and then of course that's larger than we've seen in the past. It mostly runs around 2%. Because of the bubble though, we got a little bit more, and also it's based on our enrollment count. So that's the increase there is twofold. So overall, our operating levy area is increasing by $2.3 million. And again, this first section, this is discretionary money for the district, so we can use this for programming across the district wherever we need it. As we move now into the next section, I have assigned components. Everything after this is all restricted dollars. They're all revenue streams that we have to use in a particular way. So again, achievement and integration, as you know, we have that grant in place, but 30% of the money that we have for our integration comes from levy. Increase here of $170,000. Safe schools, that's the money that we use for security, it's money we use for SRO officers based on the enrollment count. So the increases you're seeing here is because we have more students for next year. 917 also gets safe school money. They do not have any levy authority, so all the member districts levy a small amount and give to 917. Our vocational, a little bit down, we have a little, this is based on the number of actual teachers we have in vocational. So as that changes, somebody retires, we get somebody that gets paid a little less, that's why this is adjusted, that's why you're seeing this as a little bit less going into 24. Our reemployment, if you remember, we had quite a bill that came after the pandemic. They waited, they didn't know what they were going to do with all the unemployment that they paid, and they waited and waited, and all of a sudden we got this huge bill. So that's why you're seeing an increase here from 101 to 189. QComp, that's our QComp program. Again, part of this comes from the state of Minnesota as aid, and part of it is levied just like the A&I grant is. OPEB, this is other post-employment benefits. These are health benefits for our retirees. And what happens here is we have an actuarial that we put together to look at what those costs are. We levy what that actuarial amount is, but then at the end of the year, if we actually spent a little less or a little more, that gets adjusted. So we get covered with that costs. Lease levy, of course, these are our payments on our new additions. Over at the new gymnasium at McGuire, it's part of this building, part of the community ed building, and so forth. So it's all areas that we're able to lease for educational space. Small increase here, $9,400. No, I'm sorry. I was in the wrong line, minus 49. Abatement adjustments, what these are, if people did not make their payments, pay their taxes, and we were short at all, we're able to levy those shortages, and that's what the abatement shows up here as. The next section here is all capital areas. Our operating capital, again, is funded 43% levy. The rest of it is aid from the state of Minnesota. You can see here up to $1.3 million on the levy side, of an increase of $200,000. LTFM here, these are the dollars that we get direct we levy each year to use, so we're levying here the $6.8 million, which we'll use in that year, increase of 456. And this is based on a formula, and it's based back on the information we sent in back in June. Capital projects levy, that is strictly based on our net tax capacity. That rate, that tax rate stays constant for the whole time that we have that particular levy. And remember that the capital projects levy is used for our technology devices, is used for our STEM levy money that we use, and some security pieces. We pay for a lot of cameras, replacement of cameras with this money. So overall, increase here of a little over $4 million. And you see that half of that is up on top in the operating levy. Community service.
Can you clarify, like I see 55 million, and so I'm trying to see how that aligns with your property tax list here, or are they not supposed to match? Because I'm looking at your 24 budget, and it's 50 million, so.
Remember, this is 25.
25, got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Community service. The board did pass this resolution here a couple months ago, talking about the adjustment in our population of our district. So that's why you're seeing a little increase there, $69,000. Same with the youth service and the after-school, that's all based on the population of our particular district. Early childhood, this is a formula that we get from the state of Minnesota. You see a small decrease here. That fluctuates from a year to year between state aid and levy. You're seeing a decrease here, but the total dollars for early childhood has not gone down. The rest is coming in aid to fill that gap. Our home visiting, we get reimbursed for what that home visiting costs. So that $81.79 is an actual cost. Small increase there of $1,300. Our disabled adults, same thing. The money that we spend in that program, we're able to levy for. School age care, after school, that's a paid program for everybody who participates in it. But when it comes to our kids with special needs, we're able to levy for that extra help that we need in those areas. So that's what you're seeing there. And actually, you're seeing a decrease actually in that levy, because a couple years ago, especially at the end of the pandemic, when a lot of people weren't using the program, they spent less. So we levied a certain amount, we didn't spend it, so now we're giving that money back to the taxpayer. Again, a small abatement piece, and then moving on to our debt service, you see that our regular debt service there at $15.5 million. The LTFM bond payment there at $3.5 million. So we're actually seeing a $1 million decrease in the debt service, but it's entirely due to the debt service fund getting too big. Every year we're allowed to levy 105% of the actual dollars we need to make that payment in case someone doesn't pay their taxes. But at the end, whatever we have left over, we give back. So that $1 million is going back to our taxpayers because we don't need that much in that fund. So overall, you're seeing a 4.73% increase in our levy from this year into next year. Oh, did I make it in 10 minutes?
No, but that's okay.
And that,
Do we understand?
and that's the math, is correct?
Yes, and then when we come to you next week, what we're going to ask you to do is make a motion for the maximum. That way, if MDE missed something, so we have to make some adjustment where it's maybe a little bit more, we will still be able to do that in December. Otherwise, if we pick a dollar amount today, we're locked in, we cannot change it. So we'll ask the board to make a motion to levy the maximum on the
So
preliminary.
you approve that amount, but it gets finalized in December.
That's what I was going to ask.
It gets finalized, it's not
This isn't
final.
an additional.
Okay, right.
Right, and MDE right now, the numbers are still fluctuating. They've had some computer problems, and there's a couple pieces that have been fluctuating the last couple of days. So it could move about 50,000, but that'd be about all it's going to be.
Yeah.
Can you repeat again, like what happens when the enrollment numbers don't materialize? I mean,
Then we give the money back.
We give the money back,
Yeah.
okay, got it.
And I don't think people realize that.
How do they get, it doesn't come in as like, hey, here's an extra, they don't get a check, or is it subtracted?
No,
the
you'll just get
following year?
less tax.
The following year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, no matter what,
Never.
because we don't know what the enrollment numbers are until after the fact, so they're already taxed at
Yeah.
4.73%.
So the numbers we're using here to project these numbers are actually 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's why we project our enrollment, and we watch it very closely.
And that's why, if you remember, even as we were talking about the budget reductions last year, that's why you saw that big chunk of money going back to the state, because the projections of what were there were higher than what actually materialized, so that ended up being $2 million.
Yeah, that was a lot of money. Yeah, back COVID year, that really got hit. Yeah.
So that's why you have to make sure you try to monitor your enrollment on a pretty regular basis.
What was the previous year? Are you historically in that 4.7, 4.5%?
Actually, last year was more, if you remember.
We were at 7.
No, it was 15.
Oh, it was that high?
It was big. And it's all because of the inflation factor.
Oh, that's.
Last year, there was a over 10% adjustment in our operating levies, and that's where it all.
Which means the
rest of
property
these were
taxes
pretty
went up
close.
10%.
I'm sorry?
Well, the property taxes went up 15%. Last year.
Our levy went up 15%. Doesn't mean your taxes went up. That's one thing to remember. As our community is growing and growing and growing, the same dollars get spread out for over more people.
Got it.
So,
Unless you move into a bigger house.
well, that's the issue. Over in Credit River, the Scott County had really pushed their values of those houses up, and they really got hit hard. And where in town here, people didn't get hit like that at all. Even this, when we talk about 4%, you probably get 3.
Burnsville.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you should take over
Because
part of
it's hard, because if you remodeled or however your house
Yeah.
is assessed or anything you did, so get down to the property level discussion is very challenging. But you can almost, because of all the growth, can count on this being the worst case scenario.
Most time it's going to be less, probably a percentage.
Yeah,
of
because of all the growth. And I had this conversation, I was at somebody's house on Friday or Saturday night, and they were
Maybe it's
saying,
an
when is all
interval day."
this gonna stop asking for levy dollars? And I'm like, it's not, because that's the kind of way the system requires us school districts to operate. And they had no idea that, they just thought, well, with all this growth, you're getting so much more money than you plan. And I go,
We're not.
no,
They
we're
don't
getting the same
understand.
amount. It's less impact for you because it's spread out. And they're like, you gotta get that message across to people.
Yeah, and I'll say that next week when we talk about it, but yeah, a city or a county, if they need more money, they just change their tax rate and they just collect more dollars.
Right.
And as their net tax capacity grows, they just collect more dollars.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
Yeah, I think that's.
We collect the same amount of dollars spread over more people.
And I
Right.
think that's a good message for communications to get out, because they don't realize that.
All right, do we have any more questions on this one, so I can keep Bill on his time?
Trying. He's doing a
I'm
good-
trying.
He's doing a great job. It's tough.
I know,
Doing a good
I
job.
know, it's tough reeling you guys in.
I
You just keep going.
One more, not even a question, but just a statement that to 2024-25 projections is 12,305 based on your latest report. So I'm assuming you got this number working with TeamWorks and their special algorithm to kind of forecast what that number is. That's what-
Yeah, I use the exact numbers on our
Got it,
projection.
assessment,
Yeah.
got it. So again, if it materializes,
Same thing.
we're looking at 4.7%. If it doesn't materialize, the following year, a lower amount would be requested.
Correct.
Got it.
All right. Moving on to the legislative resolutions from MSBA.
So normally what you have, and you've seen MSBA send information to you, they ask for each school board to provide them any feedback on what you would like them to lobby for legislatively. So normally they ask for that at this time of the year. So if you hopefully saw that or got the email that said, hey, if you've got some, here's what our legislative platform is going to be. Do you have any other thoughts or ideas? So this is your time to provide that to Kim. And I think, do you still sit on the MSBA?
I'm a delegate, yes. Yeah.
So you can take over.
So, yeah, I will tell you, they're due by September 29th. I would recommend that we start adding this as a standing item to see if there's anything we want to discuss in the August meeting, so that we would have the month to write them, because they usually do require research and stuff. So if there's anything legislatively we want to submit, it literally needs to be done in the next couple of weeks.
We can ask them to correct the MCA data calibration.
And why are they mandating so many policies, and why are they doing
So
this?
that's
and
already
why are
out
they-
there, so you can go on to their website and you can find these pink sheets that got some standing resolutions that have already been passed in prior years, so, or past years. So if there's anything, but I do believe the MCA corrections and other matters were
Corrections.
tested.
I would say the other one that's out there is if they don't do a special session, the whole SRO component is something that they'll be lobbying for. The other thing is they'll be asking for, at least from what I understand, an adjustment in the formula. They can't necessarily come back and say, hey, we're going to give you more, but there's calculations that they can do differently to ask for different higher appropriations in certain areas. So they can't come back and say, hey, we're instead of 4 and 2, we're going to give you 4 and 4. But they can come back and say, we're changing some formula appropriations, whether that's special education, something like that. is
That
how
would
they-
be nice.
How they can do that, but.
That was quite
That's the only other way, because they know that the funding, even though they're saying it's historical, so are the aspects that we have to pay for that didn't get funded, so.
And so if there is resolutions that people are interested in having written up, there's a form that they have out there, and you kind of write like what you want to be resolved, that, you know, you do this, and then you have to put the argument for why you feel this needs to be done or what needs to be fixed, and some of them are as simple as a couple pages, and some are
It's on the website.
dozens of pages. Yep.
A question, I don't know if you can, and I don't mean to put you on the spot either, because it's not on the agenda, but I heard that Apple Valley discontinued SROs in their facility, and so while Lakeville still has our SROs in place, so I just want to recognize and acknowledge, like, appreciate you getting ahead of it and having those conversations with our Lakeville police force to make sure that we've got folks in there. Any initial feedback or concerns from the police thus far around SROs?
Is that on the agenda?
Is this another topic? It's not on the agenda, I know, we don't have to talk it, we can talk about it next week.
Brian, I'll
So-
talk to you offline, because I saw the chief today at lunch.
Okay.
Oh, perfect. There we go.
And I saw Justin at the chamber meeting this morning, so the city manager, so we can talk to you afterwards.
So, but we got a thumbs up and we're still good. Okay,
All right.
all right.
917 just signed a new contract, just so you know.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know. All right, so moving on to board calendar. We had some discussion during our board development session, the first one with MSBA, where we were discussing moving some of the sessions around so that our board development session wasn't at the beginning of the month, our work session was, so that we had more time to process information and then have the board development in between. So I wanted to take a moment just to look at least the next like 3 months to make sure that, you know, where we're at, and if the board feels like we need to move some things around. One thing I was thinking about in particular was November, since we have had 2 months where we've had some extensive board development training where members have stayed for over 3 hours. So honoring your time, and then how can we, you know, do that moving forward when we're thinking about that. So for November, I'm wondering if we want to switch the actual working session to the 14th. Sorry, I'm on this on my phone, so it's really small. And then have the board development session would be on the 21st and cancel that one so that people have like Thanksgiving week off with their family. And then have the regular board meeting on the 28th.
It sounds good.
Any thoughts about that? I know people have families and they travel and.
What's,
It's
does that,
the Tuesday before Thanksgiving.
does that put the district office on,
High alert.
yeah, I don't know, I mean.
It's a week difference. So.
I know.
A copy in your blue folder of the calendar. but-
See, I looked in there and I don't have it. So I'm looking, I just pulled it up on my phone so that I'd have it.
But I'm just a little concerned about our notice that we give when we publish this, when we make it. So if we're gonna make a change, or you talked about making a permanent change to the work session instead of board development.
Thank you.
And then board development, and then regular meeting.
I don't know if we
Well, I
need
don't know
to,
what we,
I don't know if we need to make a change every month, but considering that in September and October, instead of us, you know, spending like an hour meeting together, we've been meeting together for 3, so that's like 6 hours that board members have put in. Maybe it would be nice to make some changes for November and possibly December.
So I think those longer ones though, like the 2-3 hour ones that we're gonna do is like that's the annual retreat that we've committed to, so that is separate and outside of the board development.
We did the retreat, but then we also did board development sessions with MSBA where we committed, it was like 6 hours worth of training over the past 2 months.
With phase 3.
Yep.
So what's the ask, what are we doing in November?
she's proposing just to switch the 21st, cancel because it's Thanksgiving week, and have the work session on the 14th.
Yeah, that sounds good.
They're, in the calendar, they're not identified as work session, or they're just.
Because they're all
work session,
considered,
right?
they're all considered
So
meetings.
it really would, we wouldn't have to notify the public that we're switching.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, we do
we just cancel it.
because
We have to cancel
The
it.
first one is not recorded, it's not live streamed, it's really for your learning.
Mhm.
This one is audio recorded, the last one is video recorded. So they've come to have a pattern for many years. I'm just saying, if you want to switch it up.
We haven't had this pattern for years.
Complicated to
No,
go.
we haven't.
I don't
Right,
think
well,
we're not gonna switch
we
it.
haven't
just
had
wanna
a
do it ad
pattern
hoc.
because
No,
we just
we haven't had
added
a
board
pattern.
development sessions, so it's been a pattern for this year. So I get what you're saying with the public being used to that, but work sessions have always been there, but board development
So
is
I make
new
a
this
motion to
year.
cancel the 21st of November and add more hours on the 14th.
You know,
You don't need
a
that.
motion, you just have to have.
You don't need more,
consensus.
you don't need more hours.
So I think the 14th would be a work session. We're canceling the board development session for that month, which would fall on the 21st, and then having the regular meeting on the 28th.
Sounds
Correct?
good.
Okay, and so then, on December, I was just checking with Bill, because we have our truth and taxation meeting, that's due in December, and that has to occur by December 20th, is that correct?
Yes, and right now.
By state statute?
Yeah, right now we are planning to do it the 19th, because that was the.
And we've usually only had one meeting in December, so can we talk about consolidating those?
What?
Well, there's a work
Easy.
session and.
Easy. In the past, we really, I think, only had one meeting in December.
One board meeting,
One
board
regular
meeting.
board meeting.
Right, so can we just
It was as early as.
So,
consolidate?
so are you asking on the
That's
19th, we
board
do a
meeting, yeah.
regular
We
board
only have one
meeting
board
and the
meeting.
truth and
Right.
consolidation?
What was your comment, because I didn't hear, because he was talking.
It's normally part of
We
your
don't need two
regular
meetings.
board meeting.
Oh.
So normally you have, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill,
Yeah, we
you normally
do
have
it.
like a hearing that's prior to the board meeting, and then you have your truth.
You have to have,
that's
yeah,
part
you
of
have to
the
have a public
taxation.
comment on it.
That makes sense.
And I think, Dave, some of your questions on that, and I just want to make sure I'm honoring everybody's voice, and so that your voice is heard at the table, that you were wondering if we could move those up and do the working session on the 5th and do truth and taxation on the 12th? Was that your question?
I was just, yeah, I guess, I just, yeah.
Brian?
I don't.
I know that we don't have a meeting on the 5th, so with it being for the 12th, I think with it being SLO's holiday season, there may be less topics to be discussed. I
Right.
would rather, if we're going to do anything, keep the 19th meeting in place, but maybe move the 12th to the 5th, just because when and if the levy passes, will there be things that we need to discuss in December? And will it be needing to be discussed sooner than later? So I haven't gone through a levy process before, so I don't know. I haven't gone through a border process before, laundry process, so.
Part of what would be the component would be if there was something that you needed updated on in regard to the boundary issue would probably be the main thing. That would be a component of that, because anything else is probably related to staffing and programmatic type changes, which would probably be done after Christmas.
To me, I don't know if if we're gonna have two meetings, it doesn't necessarily matter.
I don't think we need to have
When
two
they are.
meetings, but that's my humble personal opinion.
Humble?
Well, it may be helpful to wait to cancel that, to know if we.
Yeah, but people
Well,
have
but the thing
plans.
is, the truth and taxation meeting
We
has
have
to
to
be
have.
decided tonight.
We have to
which is-
have that.
Which is why we have to discuss it tonight, because he needs to let people know if
Yes.
if we're
Well,
flipping that.
That
Or,
information goes
right,
into your statement you get from the county?
Yeah.
At what time and where is it at?
yeah,
Yeah, the counties need to have it.
yeah.
Because there's
That
pub-
happens on the 12th right now, or the 19th?
19th.
It's on the 19th right now.
So,
I'm not going anywhere after the 19th.
And I guess I'm going to ask Bill this question, but if you move the business meeting too far in advance, you're not going to have all your bills for the end of that month to be able to.
Oh, that's
approve.
true. It was
Well,
like
but
in
last year
January.
So if you do it on the 19th, which is closer to the end of the month, we'll have some of those financial things. The holidays throw a little kink in anything anyway, but it would be a little bit of difference.
It takes us to about the 15th.
But
to
last
get
year, we had the
everything
meeting earlier, though, didn't we?
closed. Yes, we used to have the meeting the very first Tuesday of December.
Which is why I asked him, because I was looking historically about when we meet, and then I was like, are we not meeting statute? Because I wanted to make sure we were in compliance, so that was why I reached out to him as well.
So is the ask to have one meeting on
It has to be by the
20th.
20th, by statute. So right now, we've got it on the 19th, so we're in compliance.
it feels like there's more, I'm just gonna put it out there, that it feels like there's more going on this December than last December. I mean, I wasn't on the board then, but I don't remember there being, like, I just feel like we leave it where it is and we'll.
We can, and I mean, the easiest adjustment would be if there's not a whole lot on the working session agenda, we could always just combine it and do like a small working session, like a half an hour before the regular meeting. So that's another way,
Yeah.
that's an
But
option.
keep in mind, before the regular meeting, we have stakeholder sessions.
Correct.
Okay, have it after.
Good.
Could I don't want
Yes.
to, I don't want to overstep, but could I just make an opinion? If the truth in taxation is due by the 20th, just making some kind of a contingency plan in case there's really bad weather on the
That's-
19th.
That's the other concern too, so.
Yeah, we haven't had that problem before.
We'll do it on.
So this year we'll have.
Yeah, it probably will.
Yep, that will be it.
That was all.
Yep, as a special ed teacher that follows due dates, like
I think
makes
that's
me a
fair.
little
I think that's
apprehensive.
reasonable. Then you move the truth in taxation on the 12th and then have your regular board meeting on the 19th. I don't know if you can have the regular board meeting on the 12th, can you?
We can do truth and taxation on the 12th.
During the meeting.
Yeah.
Why would you
and-
wanna
And just
do it
do the
two sep-
regular meeting
What?
on the 12th too. I mean, we could just make it all on the 12th.
Well, he was talking about Bill's meeting.
Yeah, we could do both on the
You okay?
12th, but then he's got to find
Yeah, we can do
the.
the 12th. That's
Okay.
You could move everything from the 19th
To the 12th.
if that's
Okay.
what you really want to do.
Yes, then you end up having just one in December.
And if for some reason the 12th is a bad day,
We'll
then
do
you've
the
got the
19th.
19th to
That
come
makes
back.
sense.
Correct.
When is the next meeting in January, just so that, like.
Well, see, that's
things
another
that-
thing I wanted to bring up. So at least these 3 months, because one of the things the board talked about last January was making sure we had our organizational meeting right away. The first
Yes.
meeting we have scheduled isn't an organizational meeting, it's actually board development. So that's another instance where I think
Let's
we
change
need to
that.
have like a working session or something, or to have our organizational meeting the first,
Monday?
well, but the first Monday's a holiday, and we usually
Oh.
meet on Tuesdays. So right now, like, we have a board meeting, I think it's, is it the 8th or the 9th?
The 9th.
So that should technically be our organizational meeting.
Let's do that.
That's
Are-
fine.
Are we, didn't we just say we were going to change and do the second Tuesday as our work session and the third one as
Well,
board development?
we talked about that, but then we also don't want to put the district in a bind where they have to come up with that information like 2
Oh,
weeks.
2 weeks
before.
early. Oh, got
Right,
it.
so we were
Okay.
kind of thinking like,
Got
for
it.
as needed when we have things
Got
like
it.
this come
Got
up.
Oh, now
So
it's
that's
starting to
the
make
issue.
sense.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Got it.
Okay,
Yep.
can somebody give me a summary of what we decided the dates
Okay,
are?
yes.
It's, you hit 3 hours, I'm out of here. I'm just,
It's not
my
free
mind's
yet.
out of here.
It's not free.
I know, my mind's out of here already.
Thanks, Bill.
Give me the dates that we're doing what?
So for November,
Yes.
we are having a working session on the 14th.
Okay,
The 21st would have been our board development, and we're canceling that, and then having a regular meeting on the 28th.
got it.
And then for December, we're having the truth and taxation meeting and the regular meeting on the 12th, with the 19th being a contingency if we needed anything additional.
Okay,
And then in January, because we have to do our organizational meeting in January, and statute says like it should be
Yeah.
the first available, so that would be Tuesday, the 9th.
okay,
So that would be an organizational meeting of the board.
good, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right.
And then the 16th will be the work session.
Yes. Yes.
So is the 9th going to be a business meeting then?
It's just the
Well,
organizational
it's an
meeting.
Organizational meeting.
Yes. So that's the one where we elect
Will you-
officers and
Will you
do all of
become
that.
chair then?
I've had enough, I really have had enough.
So that's those were the things that I anticipated were changes that needed to occur, so.
Canvassing board meeting after elections, probably on the 14th. Whoever we can get, a small group, would need to meet to canvass the results officially, so.
On November
Plan
14th?
on that, the 14th, that timing should work out, although I have to double check.
Oh, yeah, we've
Okay.
had to come in, we've had to come in special.
You gotta approve
Thanks for,
the
thanks for
Right.
mentioning that.
What?
Yeah.
You have to
A few of
approve
us
the
have to come in
election
and
results.
vote.
Canvass the results.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Not all of us have.
I know.
Just,
You'll be in
Well, I'll-
Hilton Head
we
anyway.
can go out to breakfast
Yeah,
after.
one of us will
All
cover
right.
for you.
you can pay for breakfast after.
Yeah.
Moving on from that, that's all we're gonna do for board
$4.
calendar right now. Shh,
Good.
Dave. Last one on the agenda, and I'd like to hit this in 5, since I would like to be done before 9. Board compensation, I'm adding that based on, or that was added to the agenda based on Dave asking for
Yep.
that. So do you wanna speak to that and what your,
No, I'm just going to propose we reinstate our salary
When?
next week.
Next week?
Yeah.
I'm in favor. I mean, I think when the board made that decision, the current state was that we had $211,000 in our savings account. Is that kind of the plan, or that was the, what was shared during the budget review? And so with the updated preliminary budget, we're projected at $4 million next
how does that?
which is a drastic change, and thank
We'll have to
goodness
put
for the
contingency
$8 million
because
in
that's
professional
budget.
development. So,
Okay.
yes, so I feel that it's appropriate to make the adjustments and maybe even a market calibration, so.
Can I ask Bill to speak to what that would do for the budget right now, just so that we?
Well, I think just
have
everyone
all
has
the
to realize
information?
if we put the payment back in, that is not budgeted right now.
Yep.
Okay, so it is an add to the budget, would have to come out of contingency to make
It's
the
about
payments.
40,000.
47 something?
Yeah.
Can we just clarify what period of time we were not supposed to have because I remember we voted on that, and then it was like.
So it
wasn't gonna
stopped
go
July
in-
1st.
It stopped on July 1st.
Yes,
And so,
There was nothing,
there was,
there was nothing said on it.
of when that, I'm not sure. I think we
So,
were thinking a year. I don't
From
know.
my understanding, you got paid January, February, March, April, May, June, July July you didn't get paid, August didn't get paid.
Oh, we got $1 in July, didn't we?
Terry gave me
Yeah,
$1.
your dollar.
No, we
So
got
I
a
got-
dollar.
We got $1 in July.
I paid more in taxes.
So you've got 3 months of non-payment, or a dollar payment.
but we were planning on, there wasn't necessarily a plan necessarily.
No.
I want to be mindful of kind of what we were doing in that moment and the fact that other people who have been impacted by these budget cuts were not making immediate corrections to, when we talk about taking things away from teachers, I feel like there's other things to be thinking about that we made budget cuts on that are meaningful, and it doesn't feel very genuine, to be honest, if we're doing that and then going back on it. I don't know.
But also consider that we have an election coming up next year too.
Well, I don't think we should do permanent.
Right.
I agree that for next year, we have to be really mindful about having some sort of.
So are you saying that we should just take it through this one, July 1st to June 30th, just for the year?
I'm saying if
I
we,
mean, that's what
that's what we committed to.
yeah, and.
I think we did.
No, I don't think we committed to anything like that.
I'm just asking.
I think the
that-
public would look at it saying, well, they gave up their salaries for a year. That's what I think the public would think. But, I mean,
That's what I'm thinking, they think too.
yeah, because it was a 1 year, it was a budget. We reduced that money out of this year's budget. But next year's budget starts July 1, where we could add it back in, I suppose.
And so I,
In this year's budget, we're projected at $4 million in the savings.
Yeah, I know.
It's different from having 211,000.
Yeah, I get
And
that.
I
I
think we
just,
need
I
to be
just
fair
don't
and
think it
equitable
looks
to folks
good.
here.
The only other, again, you get to decide, but you also have to remember you have a levy coming up. And I don't know how that plays with some of your constituency.
I've not heard any negative on it.
But
I'm
you
just
what?
saying,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, not that I'm a huge fan of it, you got a round of applause from whoever was sitting in the room. And that round of applause can very quickly turn into
Oh, yeah.
not being happy, especially when you're asking for more money. So again, I think you have to play both sides of that. To me, we would just have to figure that out in the budget
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
deal with it if
1%
that's what you
extra,
decide
I
to
think.
do.
Pardon?
okay, so so it actually comes into play with the organization meeting in January.
Right.
Because you said market correct or whatever. And so that could be the discussion in January.
Because I feel like I would just say if we're going to talk about this, then we also talk about the 10,000 we cut for the.
Refrigerators?
Like
We've
the
already
fan.
been asked about that.
No, then you open the door.
Well, it's like.
How many Cokes are in that refrigerator?
Well, do I feel like this position should be compensated given the amount of time that we put into it and effort? Yes, I don't think we should be, I don't think we're going to attract good candidates. for
My
the board
my
if
money
we
goes to
don't
the
have-
school, to the kids who
But
just
I
aren't getting
also
it
wanna
now because I
be-
give scholarships.
Who's ever
I
done it for,
also-
who's ever done it for the money?
Nobody's doing it for the money.
Right.
But I think there is some, what I will say is, there are costs associated with this position that people don't necessarily think about. The fact that we're supposed to attend events and things like that cost money. And I want to be thoughtful about people who might be in different positions who don't have that kind of money and making sure that there's compensation to do the things that we have to do. But I also don't want to be disingenuous in terms of what we committed to and.
Right.
I think it's too soon in the process to just say, let's start paying this again, since we've only not been paid for a few months. So I guess if we want to revisit this, most appropriate time would be during the
January. That makes
organization
sense to me.
meeting, when we have to set our salaries.
I'll compromise on that, the January meeting.
Brian?
Okay?
I don't know, I mean, we're investing our time, and we made the proposal with the assumption that we had $211,000 in the bank.
But it's the end of September, so if you look at, if we're talking again in January, that's October, November, December, that's just 3 more months. Are you willing to wait 3 months to discuss it in January?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
I don't know.
So that'll be
It's
part of our
more
organization.
attracting, just to answer you, Carly, and we
Yeah.
can discuss offline, because I want to talk to you afterwards. But it's more of attracting good candidates and being fair. I don't need the money. It's more the principle of the thing, and that's
I
what,
fully agree.
and that's why I brought it
I
up.
fully agree and support that and have that thought for next year. We can't
Yeah.
continue this, but I do think.
Yeah, so I think I think January 1st, we can address it.
Yep, so the
And when would it be
consensus is.
effective?
We'll talk about-
January 1st. No, it would be when we meet.
If
I
whatever
hear
we-
July or January
And that
1st.
too is a board down, and you have to
Yep.
get
In
a March amendment.
January,
Be
it's a
up to the board.
discussion,
It'd be up to the
and we
board.
set our salary there, so we
Yeah.
can figure
Yeah.
that all out then.
Okay.
Right, right. All right, having completed all the items on the agenda, we're going to say we're done for the night.
Ta-da. By the way, Carly, I've talked to Ken.